All right, today's October 25th, as everybody know. I am Rosanna Vargas, the appointee by the Speaker, Carl Hasty. Oh, sorry, 22nd. I'm already ahead of time. Rosanna Vargas, appointee by New York State Speaker, Carl Hasty, and we can begin introductions to my right.
My name is Kimberly Galvin. I'm appointed by Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb.
David Previtt, appointed by Senate Minority Leader John Flanagan. It's just introductions, not important.
John Nona, appointed by Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins.
Jay Jacobs, appointed by Governor Andrew Cuomo.
Henry Berger, joint appointee of the governor, the speaker, and the majority leader of the Senate.
Crystal Rodriguez, appointed by Speaker Carl Hasty.
Denora Gatacho, appointee of Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins.
All right, so we'll just go over a couple of House rules, and as everybody knows, and if you don't know, you'll be informed right now, there is a 3-minute limit for everyone coming before us after the State Board of Elections. If you already have testified at the previous hearing, you cannot testify a second time. Please avoid testifying or making any comments that you already have stated or that you have heard, unless it's a new point of view, so we can hear those. And if the Board of Election is ready, they can begin. Yes, please come up. And as soon as you sit down, please identify yourself with your position, state your name, and then proceed on with your testimony. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Todd Valentine. I'm one of the co-executive directors of the State Board of Elections. Along with me is Robert Brem, the other co-executive director, as well as our counsel, Brian Quayle, one of the co-counsels. The other co-counsel is on your board as Commissioner Kimberly Galvin. We're here to talk about 4 main things that the State Board of Elections can bring to you. We've provided written testimony to you that amplifies some of this, but we want to highlight that because we know your time is limited, and we'll each speak a little bit on all of the main points. 4 main points. Any public financing program should be administered within the State Board of Elections. The reviews and enforcement should be done in a timely manner. The effective date should start with a news cycle for both the statewide and the legislative offices, in order to allow time for that to ramp up. And then obviously any program should be administered and funded properly. As to the administration, within the State Board, just a few points that I want to raise, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Brem and Mr. Quayle. We are a bipartisan Board of Elections, and as bipartisan to us is an independent entity. It is balanced. It's not one that's controlled by the executive chambers. We believe it's a resilient and resistant to the oscillations of political will. I mean, it started in 1974, and we can amplify more of our histories in our testimony, but it was designed to take it out of the sphere of that, to allow for that. It's our proposition that the program should be united within us. It's the most effective way. Our structure lends to increased confidence and should be implemented, allow us to do it in a uniform and fair way. And then utilizing our existing institutional knowledge and experience, where we were the only agency that did the pilot program on the statewide level. And the existing systems and structure would provide a setting that could be done in a more efficient and cost-effective manner. There are often times where we're criticized that it's a gridlock occurs because it is bipartisan. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Splits are extremely rare, and they're based upon honest differences of opinion with regards to the policy. The statute itself oftentimes deals with what happens when tie votes occur. But by and large, it requires a consensus to move forward with that opinion, and that is something that the reality is we have been able to reach a fair consensus whenever it comes to any of those issues. Uh, rather than creating a new agency, the State Board of Elections has been working for more than 45 years on this issue. Public campaign financing. We've been doing it since 1974. We have built within the agency what is now termed the compliance unit, but it had been the campaign finance unit. Then we have developed over time significant software systems that allow us to track the large number of filers that we do have. There are over 12,000 filers. That includes both the local and the statewide offices. And over time, they have developed relationships with the treasurers and the candidates so that they're comfortable in asking questions of us, and we can provide advice and guidance on the statute. And that's not something that a new agency can just do immediately. So now I'll turn it over to Mr. Brem.
Good morning, and thank you for your have to remember to hold the button. Thank you all for your time serving on this important panel. Our written testimony gives a perspective, I think, that is different than what you've heard thus far. And it basically identifies a manner to create a program that does not put in place any duplicate efforts, but builds upon those systems that I think largely are universally agreed to as working, so that the remaining funds that are available for public financing could really be used for the public matching portion or the candidate support portion of the program, or expect to the least amount of duplication as possible. The state board routinely works with the county boards of elections, with candidates, and with treasurers. I think the campaign finance compliance unit over the last 5 years especially has developed a very good track record of support. They have completed over 118,000 compliance reviews, provided compliance information where a treasurer needed to give some type of additional information, and also training information. So I think that program is really working. The concept that we are at loggerheads, there are very few times when that really happens. It's usually when there's an issue of first impression of a statute or a new development. How does it fit in with an old statute? I think a good example is the LLC loophole. It clearly was not something that we agreed to philosophically as a program, but one side felt it needed to be resolved via legislation. The other thought we might be able to resolve it via an opinion. The court sided with legislation, and this spring that bill was passed. It had a 7-day effective date. It's about as close to being effective immediately as we've seen this year. And in 7 days, we put out for all people who could do that program a manner and a procedure and a policy on how they could comply with the law. So when there is clarity, we act swiftly. So far this year, 26 bills have been signed into law, some that have been debated over a very long period of time. But each and every one of those bills, one of them is this panel, so other than that, 25 others, we have implemented. Early voting will start on Friday. That is something that has been on a wish list of a number of people for many years. Electronic poll books. There are a number of things that are happening that when we have clarity of responsibility, we get it done. And I think this is one of those examples. I think there are many instances where candidates and interactions with boards of elections to know who's running, when they're running, and how they meet simple metrics of being in or out of a program, we can meet. The other issue is where you think there needs to be a tie-breaking vote. Those are the areas where I think for that odd number person panel, we call it in our testimony a panel that I envisioned from my time on the Board of Zoning Appeals a campaign finance hearing panel, a manner in which a person who feels that they have been wronged by the administrative process can have an expedited path. I think Mr. Liu is an example of an individual from the Campaign Finance Board who was denied participation in the public matching program. He went to court, he won the court case, but he lost the election because he was not participating in the program. There needs to be a clear, quick process. In the election law, we have both an administrative and a legal review of that administrative process that's quick. You need quick and clear processes, and that's why we think a panel, we envision of hearing officers that would be assigned an odd number that would be available in a quick period of time that would serve as the appeal board, and of course, that decision should have a quick path to the courts, and we recommend also changes to Article 16 for legal challenges that would be expedited also. But I think there are very little times when that that appeal needs to happen. So I think if you identify those instances where you feel strongly that that needs to happen, put them in that segregated area, would still allow the rest of the program to intertwine with the regular work of the board in a manner that I think would be efficient. I think it would be easy to admit. It's a challenge, but easier to administer than setting up a separate agency. And one last thing I wanted to point out, in 2014, when a unit was created within the state board, the structure of the state government of committing to contracts, putting people on the payroll, and paying bills doesn't work very efficiently when there's units within an agency with different responsibilities over the budget. We are still to this day trying to work out how to pay the bills for simple things like the state Office of Information Technology Services. So another entity under that same scenario would be a bit of a challenge. So I think if it's really necessary, make it clear how we pay the bills also. That would be very important to us, because how you submit a budget, only the co-executive directors of the agency can commit the agency to a contract. Things of that nature, I think, are very important if you're going to create such an activity. I don't think it's necessary. I think you can still accomplish your goal by leaving the day-to-day activities of how it would be structured. And on the structure alone, Mr. Quayle will give you a brief overview of how he thinks it would work.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that the commission has certainly come to appreciate over the course of the testimony that you've received so far, very diligently listening across the state, is that there are a number of issues that are complex. And the point that I'd like to make at the outset is that anytime you're going to build something, you need to pay attention to what the infrastructure is upon which you're going to build it. You can't have a city without the plumbing, without the electrical grid, without the key components that you need to put a building up. You can't just go out into the middle of a field and put a building up. And people don't appreciate the things that they can't see. They don't appreciate that electric grid. They don't necessarily appreciate that plumbing that's going to tie those buildings together, but they're absolutely critical. And in this area of campaign finance, the only place where existing infrastructure exists today to do it efficiently and to do it quickly, is at the State Board of Elections. And that infrastructure is legal, it is procedural, it's administrative, in addition to being substantive with respect to knowledge of campaign finance. The time that it would take to graft public financing as a new unit into the New York State Board of Elections that can take advantage of the knowledge of campaign finance, the legal support, the administrative support, and the existing administrative processes, including hearing procedure processes that already exist as a matter of regulation, would unquestionably make the process of implementing a program that New Yorkers could have confidence in infinitely more possible at the state board than elsewhere. On page 5 of our testimony, we outline one possible framework for structuring a public financing unit in terms of its interrelationship with both the compliance unit, something that's often not considered, which is how much election operations also plays into the campaign finance aspects, because it determines the universe of who actually qualifies for matching funds for participation in a program. And at the absolute the absolute beginning basis point for what the universe potentially is. And understanding ballot access, understanding the things that can happen along the way with ballot access is very important. And again, it's the only place where that synergy exists would be with the New York State Board of Elections. One of the things that we outline in terms of structure is the importance of having, Mr. Brehm alluded to this, quick determinations with respect to qualifying. And we talk about having an expedited administrative process that would be followed up by, if you choose to do it, making a hyper preference for any kind of judicial review of a candidate not qualifying, so that those determinations can be made expeditiously and with lots of layers of fairness, so that concerns about weaponizing candidate eligibility could be fully mitigated. And in addition, the process of moving through the current process of reviews of reports could be integrated with a process for auditing the campaign finance reports. There's certain amounts of overlap there, leading to final audit and determination, and then having an enforcement process that would follow the current statutory model, at least in the main. But we do underscore the importance of having in the administrative process a tie-breaking mechanism, so we don't have scenarios that could occur with gridlock. Because to the extent that bipartisanship has any quibble with it, that has any merit whatsoever, the articulation of the gridlock argument is there. Now, as Mr. Brehm and Mr. Valentine both mentioned, it's more legend than it is a reality. But that notwithstanding, making sure that there's a process that avoids a tie scenario from the get-go would be something that would inspire confidence in the administrative process.
If I may, first of all, thank you for your testimony. It was very helpful. It was helpful to receive it in advance, and for us to be able to review it. A few questions. First of all, what role would the current Enforcement Council have in the proposal as you have created it?
Well, clearly, any program needs to have a workable enforcement mechanism. I think we have an enforcement section in our testimony. By the Enforcement Council's own admission, the routine type of challenges or enforcement measures that the board used to do prior to 2014 are no longer being pursued. We recommend in your draft proposal that perhaps you allow that to come back to the board for doing the routine level of activity. We don't have the jurisdiction to do that now, but I think it was what we did well, and I think we can. Simply, for every person who fails to file a compliance report at all, for every person who fails to bring their system into compliance with a review that said they need to make a change and file it. Those are in the multiple thousands of reports that we have given to enforcement that haven't been done. So clearly, we think we can do that level. We think that fines and penalties for some of that level of activity would probably remove the lower level of type and compliance activities from that workload, and that would still allow for the traditional referral of enforcement matters to enforcement counsel that perhaps are more serious in nature. But certainly you need to have a system that sets metrics and a priority of deadlines for things to get done. The, so, I think in the entirety of 5 years, we have not had a referral since December of 2018. We have not had a subpoena in that period of
If
time.
I can excuse you.
No more than 4 hearings a year since then.
If I can interrupt, my concern here is that as currently structured, the enforcement council doesn't enforce. And the question is whether we can move that enforcement entirely within the campaign finance system. Now, as I understand what you're proposing, there's an administrative review and in all the internal workings. Any recommendation from that internal review would then go to the board. And we're in an unusual situation, I think, where we have some really good commissioners. I look at the FEC, that doesn't always last. And then if they should happen to deadlock or not be able to resolve, it then goes to an appeals bureau. And is there any question why enforcement couldn't be entirely within that kind of system, which is essentially what,
Can I just clarify for a second? I think at least I, working at the state board and hearing all the conversations, have a different interpretation of what the word enforcement means. Enforcement to us means criminal referrals, things like that. I think, like the New York City board testified, they don't have a criminal wing of their enforcement. So when you're talking about enforcement, are you just talking about the statutory fines or a combination of both the criminal and, the similar type fines that the city board does?
I'm talking purely on the civil side where it's imposition, determinations, impositions of penalties, recoupment of funds, whatever. And, if there's a criminal referral, there's a criminal referral. But I'm concerned about, what's essentially the day-to-day stuff that goes through with the 217 campaigns that we'll be looking at.
And from our perspective, I think as Ms. Galvin had indicated, where do you think enforcement? It means something different to different people. So if it is, levying a fine and carrying out that fine, is that the hearing officer process that we talked about under the campaign finance hearing panel? Give them the authority, an odd number of people, and they have the expedited first step. And if they fine you and you don't pay, do they go to court to try and enforce that? That can work with an enforcement council. Whether or not it's this enforcement council or some other enforcement council, that certainly is something that, we're not all here forever. As individuals, we represent the entity, but certainly, that was a reform of creating an independent unit that some have thought it needs another look at, perhaps. I mean, this opportunity gives you another look at. We think we can take the lowest hanging fruit, which is really not being done, and it brought the majority of people into compliance when we did the low hanging fruit. So if we are at least able to do that, I think we can administratively handle that. I think you need to have an expedited panel to assess those fines or penalties. We've never had the ability to assess a fine or penalty in the history of the state board. We've asked for it on several occasions, but we don't have it. But then there still needs to be a way, if somebody stole the money, to enforce that. In the city campaign finance board, they can make a direct referral to a prosecutor. And in the instance of the state board, we can either refer that to the enforcement council on their own initiative, or upon a complaint can. So perhaps we need to make that streamlined a little better.
I mean, and enforcement always starts with the basic building blocks of compliance. That is the one thing we have always done well and still continue to do well today, as Mr. Quayle pointed out. I mean, we built a unit just to make sure that we review every filing that comes in. We have a basic level for that. We make sure that we list who's there, who's not there. Those referrals are made to the enforcement unit. That goes to a next level. But the administrative hearing is something we've never had, but we recognize the timely that's needed to adjudicate those discrepancies with regards to compliance, whether you filed or whether, you've had issues with regards to the filings that you have made. So we think that we have the experience of doing that over the past 40-plus years.
Just
Couple
one
more
other point, if I
questions, if
could
I may.
say,
No,
if the,
I think the appeals panel, how do you envision that being created?
I think it's an independent, I almost think it's kind of like an inspector general or a separate panel who has the authority to receive and make determinations. So if, so they would be a permanent panel, they have to be available, they have to be ready to do their research and decide when they need to come in and either assess a penalty or hear an appeal if a candidate feels that they've met the threshold and the board has not gotten there.
In your system, though, in your system, the Board of Elections could do the initial assessment of penalties. If there's disagreement, it could then go to an appeals panel. Could
Correct.
you envision an appeals panel, something like the New York City Campaign Finance Board, an odd number of people appointed for terms, and, whenever there's a dispute, having them resolve it? Would that work within your system?
I think it could work within the system. We have a hearing officer process now. We would just need to make sure that they had the independence in structure. But certainly, I think they could. Depending on the program, there will be a period of time where they need to be available more readily than, as the political cycle goes. There's a season for penalties. There's a season for getting into the program.
But independence at that level?
They need to be independent at that level. Correct.
And on budget, you're suggesting in your testimony as a possibility that there be a separate budget for this entire process that could be submitted directly through without, as the New York City Campaign Finance Board does it. They submit the budget, it becomes automatically part of the executive budget, and then the legislature gets to deal with it. I believe the court system does a similar kind of process. Is that what you're envisioning there?
That's what we're envisioning. It is difficult as a unit to be to have true independence, to then be tied to the source of the dollars. But clearly, having an ability to have your budget presented, I think it's always our responsibility to propose what we need to administer this statute. Whether or not there are sufficient funds, I think, are appropriately in the legislative hands to consider all the information and decide the priorities amongst other competing interests.
I guess my question there, Director, is how do you separate out a separate budget for a unit that will be considering not only these 217 offices, but also all the other filings that presumably your unit is also going to be reviewing and essentially doing what they do now? How do you separate it out so that it really works? And this is technical, I know, but can you do it with an integrated unit, or does it have to be a separate unit?
I think we can do it with an integrated unit. There are certain assumptions of the level of work. Certainly, it'll depend on your final proposal how we need to meet that challenge. But I certainly believe we can identify. One of the items we're working with the Enforcement Council now is based on everybody except one, the Enforcement Council. We have worked with other layers of government to identify that the common expenses are about 83% for the board and about 17% for enforcement. But that generally has come from years of working at it and knowing how many workers are there, what are the activities that we are supporting, and we have come up with a method to pay the bills based on the actual work that we're doing. I think you could do the same under this kind of a program. Those that are shared expenses would have to come up with a sharing module. Those that are wholly public financing or wholly non-associated with public financing, I think we can do.
Thank you.
Just want to make sure I understand your proposal. So within the Board of Elections, have a separate unit, this public finance unit. They would be responsible for determining whether a candidate qualified, whether a candidate's complying with the rules of what they're allowed to spend money on. And also there'd be personnel to decide or actually disperse the funds to determine what the match should be. And that would be a separate unit than any personnel you now have at the Board of Elections.
It would be a new unit, but I think certainly as, you know, our units work together on other topics now. We have a compliance unit, but there's that period of time when petitions are filed and you only have this many days to complete them, that everybody helps each other. There's times when there's when these campaign finance filings that we help each other. So there are already a sharing of responsibilities, but I think clearly for public financing, it would be new responsibilities, new individuals.
Right.
And to the extent we can draw on existing services, so we don't have to hire more people and duplicate something, I think we could easily integrate them.
If I
Have you, I'm sorry, if you
This
want
was
to
just
answer.
this was just a clarifying question, point to make for you. Certainly, there could be budget items or budget positions that were clearly designated for the public financing area. Now, that doesn't mean, in my opinion, and I guess I'm kind of whatever I'm doing here, making a statement, that some of the existing compliance staff that are the best wouldn't be moved over into those public financing budget lines. But you can certainly separate and designate individual lines within an agency that could be part of the public financing budget to separate it from the ordinary work of the agency.
Sure, sure. Have you given any thought if we were to go with and recommend your model, when do you think the appropriate time for a public campaign financing program to commence?
Well, we think that should begin with a new election cycle, because we've learned that to try to drop public financing in the middle of a cycle where candidates have already begun engaging in their fundraising and their experience would not work well. That was one of the main things we learned with regards to the pilot program we did a couple of years ago. So we think it should start with whatever the new cycle is.
It'll be 2022 at the
Yes.
earliest, right? Right, okay, thank you.
Just a question, in terms of the structure that you're envisioning, in comparison with creating an entirely new independent entity, would it be your opinion that if we did this proposal that you've put forward here, would that save the taxpayers money? Would there be efficiencies in doing everything under the auspices, while we would still be able to maintain a degree of independence on the decisions through that hearing panel that you have outlined?
That is our opinion. I think there are efficiencies if they are to the extent it's clear. You need to have 1,000, you need to have 4,000 at this dollar amount with this documentation. That's what our team does routinely well. There's no reason to have to create barriers. When you drop in a unit within an agency, there are standard IT support, HR support. Surprisingly, with two directors, we have, internal controls that require our signatures on HR and IT work to make sure that we understand the priorities. It's when you have two bosses for staff, we've over time developed a process. Now, if you have a 7-member panel, is that 9 supervisors for the permanent staff? That's where it gets a little cloudy when whose priority needs to be dealt with immediately. So those are the general items that we do now. But I think generally speaking, what works better for the candidate flow, the information flow, the computer flow, the people who have expertise in developing the programs, if you really have two different masters creating business rules of how those systems work, there tend to be friction in the systems.
Yeah, it seems to me, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, please, you had mentioned something about the possibility even that when one aspect, the campaign finance aspect, picks up and gets very busy, you might have the ability to shift staff from one part of the overall Board of Elections into others. That would seem to me to create immediate efficiencies rather than having to create a new independent entity, which would have to be built, I would suspect, to undertake the maximum workload, even though there would be times when you would not necessarily require that. It'd be a little bit more inefficient. So I just want to make sure that that efficiency, I'm reading that right.
That's our view. Certainly when we had the pilot program for the state controller contest, and it was not, it was sort of modeled on the campaign finance board, but the campaign finance board only had a few times a year when money was made available. And under that proposal, it was every Friday, and the money had to be made available within 3 days, not even business days, 3 days. So that meant Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So that was, mandatory overtime, for a lot of people, uh, with a very short order. So clearly, your final proposal as to how many times a year, I think under that model, they felt that there would be more opportunities for people to present their information to get their money, so the lift would be broken up into smaller pieces. But if you have 200 and some people doing that times how many different candidates, the New York City model, with all due respect, tends to be pretty um, designed around it's the primary, and there aren't as many competitive general elections following up right after that. But outside of New York City, we have very competitive primaries and we have very competitive general elections. So the work of the candidates, the treasurers, and the staff of the board to be able to get all those reports done, those audits done, and turn over the money on a regular basis is a lot. So it helps us now to have a June primary. So that way, if you stay on the model, that kind of will free the rest of the staff to be able to support a unit like that.
Yeah, just to Commissioner Jacobs's point, I mean, obviously there are peak times at the State Board of Elections surrounding everything. Petition filings, everything ramps up. Specs and generals, everything ramps up on one side of the building. At the filing period, in the filing calendar, and of course, we're anticipating additional filings, you are correct. That would be the ramp up time where you have the staff sitting there that can handle it adequately, can do the audits at the end in a timely manner. But on those off peak times, you don't have to staff for the highest because they're already there, and then you can engage them in other things, different sorts of audits or legislative overcontribution audits, or perhaps move them over to do the specific objections to help with that if some of them are done. So it would be a utilization of a staff number that would increase efficiencies and not require as many staff.
And that's a great point, Commissioner. Another issue I think that I'm concerned with is that if you're going to have a separate agency completely that's going to handle the campaign finance aspect, it would seem to me that everyone who participates, obviously, in the campaign finance program would have their forms go there. They may also then have to go to the State Board of Elections because somebody's going to have to take a look at the candidates who are not choosing to participate, which is complicated in and of itself. But you also have parties that file and other groups that all file with the state board. So it would seem to me that you'd have to implement a very cumbersome information sharing system between two separate unique agencies that might, gum up the works, if you will. Whereas if it were all being done under the auspices of the state board, that might also create a more efficient flow of information, I suspect.
That makes sense because of the different contribution limits for participants and non-participants.
We have just finished,
and-
oops, sorry.
And yeah, that it does answer your question. We would be able to capitalize on that efficiency by having it all housed in one agency. And as the cycles are different for the public financing committee versus the non-filers or the local filers, we would have the ability to move staff between those. That could then, you wouldn't need to just have staff with a limited time period. You'd be able to use them full time and gain that efficiency from that system.
The computer systems that we just done the pilot of the test of the system and expect to roll it out in the first part of next year. But that was a total rewrite of the campaign finance filing system that was originally so-called modernized in 1998 to the system we have today. But but um, but that kind of work was a challenge in getting done because the legislature amended the statute three times in the last 4 years. So it was always kind of a break fix, stop and add this new feature to it. But I think we're ready to roll out. There's a good team of people that had a really good understanding of making sure that we try to create computer tools that further the staffing compliance work. Adding the audit feature, adding the public finance feature would still be work, but the business rules are, I think, easier to adapt to that modern computer system than to do them separately and apart.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it.
Thank you so much. I have a question. I know Commissioner Berger asked this question. I don't know that I understood fully the answer around how this PFC unit, if it were to be created, like who are the appointees that you're recommending to become the hearing officers, and what would that structure look like? Would be
Well, first, an acknowledgement that there are a number of potential models for accomplishing the appointment process, and so there's a certain amount of deliberate vagueness there because there's a lot of room for policy choices. But in terms of how the Board of Elections is actually structured now, we have, as a result of the 2014 reforms, we have a hearing officer process and a section of our rules in 6218 that regulate their behavior, and it's a set of rules that are SAPA compliant, and they're hearing officers, and there's an appointment process. So among the options would be that that be dealt with by a panel of hearing officers that are already appointed by the board, and then for any particular panel that comes up, they're randomly selected. We acknowledge in our plan that there are a number of potential manners in which those appointments might actually be effectuated, and we don't have a strong opinion on precisely how that comes to pass.
Could you share with us, as a follow-up to this, just what some of those permutations are, so we have a clear understanding of what some of our choices are in making that determination?
Well, for example, the first one being the hearing officer appointment process. You could endeavor to have a process of people who are in pre-existing roles that they be deemed appointed to this position. In other states, I don't know how well that would work here, but they've actually tapped members of the judiciary for those kinds of roles. There may be some constitutional issues under the state constitution with that, but certainly in other states we've seen that. You could also have a situation where you have a combination of certain stakeholders making appointments, and then the corpus of people who are appointed would then appoint an additional person, somewhat similar to the composition of your own panel. So there are any number of policy choices, but one of the things that sort of comes to light on this is, it is difficult to produce something that is independent truly. And it is actually one of the benefits of a bipartisan structure, because it creates a natural tension between the two sides, and there is a degree to which both sides are watching each other in a bipartisan structure that helps to keep it honest. There's an aphorism that people whose conduct is being watched as a matter of human nature just behave somewhat differently. So I think that as you contemplate the structure that you choose, you should think about ensuring that there is some natural tension in it, where there are built-in incentives for the people who are appointed to be watching each other, and that they come to it from a perspective that is highly committed to being fair, and that becomes the default because it could not be more important to the public's confidence in how this works that there be confidence in that part of the process.
Thank you. My last question, a little bit of devil's advocate here. Just, I've heard proposals, seen proposals that there be a separate unit, complete or separate agency created that would be, let's call it quote unquote, independent of the Board of Elections that would handle all facets of the campaign finance component of this work. If that were to be the case, what would need to be true for that agency to interact with your agency and still have the functionality that you oversee daily?
Well, they'd have to have an ability to communicate, starting with who's on the ballot, who gets off the ballot, because that's the threshold of any election process. So there'd have to be a manner for transmitting that information. Again, there are filers who would not be participating in the program, so there'd have to be compliance reviews of those non-participants, which would not presumably not go with the new independent agency if it were structured that way, would still remain with the State Board of Elections. You'd have to somehow structure, because it presumably would be housed within the election law, so enforcement on that would have to be dealt with in some manner. You'd have to figure out a way for compliance to occur. It would be difficult for a new agency to start right up and to try to hit the ground running. That's where we think there's an efficiency with the model that we're proposing, is that a lot of that basic work for the review of compliance is already in place. And really now it's just working with the new issues with regards to qualifying and distributing the funds.
One thing, if I could just add to Denora's question, is when the new enforcement unit started within the board, so that's a little microcosm of what we could do. We met with them routinely to devise the checklist of what our reviewers would look for so that we could train them appropriately. And we had to meet several times, 4 or 5 different times through the process of doing those reviews to get that checklist of deficiencies or missing information or that sort of type of stuff down to where both sides agreed. So there would be a lot of give and take, I think, with that new unit trying to learn the nuances of a filing and what an in-kind contribution and what those schedules mean. So a lot of that communication would need to take place between the two entities that were formed.
Can I ask one
Yeah.
question? Or can I ask one question? Going back to the appointment discussion, we've kicked this around in prior hearings, and I think most of the feedback we've gotten from groups was essentially move into an independent board comprised of a partisan appointment process controlling that board. That has, in my opinion, inherent risk. It sounds to me that that you all recognize and appreciate that risk, the safeguards that are inherent in having the bipartisan makeup that you have, and it sounds to me that the hearing the hearing officer process would provide the responsiveness needed to accommodate to the frequent needs of this type of program to ensure that a candidate's not disadvantaged. But I have a real concern of creating a board that's controlled by one party over the other, where the appointing authorities are appointing people to regulate their opponents, essentially. I just want to be clear: are you sharing that concern? That is something that we may regret if we go down that path?
It certainly is a concern when, any program will involve in many instances, especially at the statewide level, the controller's office for the release of certain funds, the attorney general to review contracts that we're doing, certainly the executive, the division of budget to pay the bills, and the entire apparatus for the Office of General Service to support the government function. And to the extent that any of that is controlled by a single entity in the executive, um, calling something independent truly doesn't necessarily make it independent. It's interesting that it was an entire Republican legislature in 1974, a Republican governor, Senate, and Assembly that created the State Board of Election as a reform to Watergate because they didn't want elections to be under a single political authority. Creating something and calling it independent doesn't make it independent. It truly has to have the tension that Mr. Quayle spoke about. Um, Certainly, we have a tension in different political philosophy at the board, but having lived through this process now for 29 years as a local commissioner and as a state board of elections individual, I think we're better for the process in the end. My colleagues are frank with me, I'm frank with them, but we treat each other with respect. We have different political philosophy, but in the end, we implement the program. Um, there are many instances that we point to in our testimony. I think we're on our fourth iteration of J-COPE. They're nice people at J-COPE, but if you go out on the street and ask the public, do they think that that is a fair and independent process? You might have a different opinion um, in some aspects. So I'm just saying, it clearly is a challenge no matter what you do. But you're doing a new program with $100 million in public funds to publicly finance campaigns. You want to make sure that the public at least feels that it's being treated fairly. There's equal opportunity for candidates, whether they're a challenger or a person running for re-election, to know that they had a fair shot at it. And I think it's not perfect, but I think this is a fairer shot than any of the ones I've seen.
It's one other question on the funding side.
A short question.
Yes,
Trying to move on, but
I know, but this is an important issue I'd like to understand, because this may be something more inside baseball than we're maybe contemplating. There's a lot of discussion about the funding of the administration of this. The way the legislation reads, it appears that the funding is meant to be inclusive of the $100 million provided for the program. My concern is discussions about a new agency, and whether or not, the question is, the jurisdiction we have, if we're limited to the election law, to create a new agency somehow with some sort of governing law that I don't know where would be housed, that would have some influence over DOB to ensure that funding mechanism was there, is confusing to me. Where if it was within the DOB, it would go through an already established agency, BOE agency, a budgeting process that you do on an annual basis, right?
Yeah, that goes back towards the efficiency of the issue that we talked about earlier, is that, creating a new agency would not be the most efficient way to utilize if the funds are limited to 100 million, that there would be less money spent and more available to those participating in the program by making it more efficient in the setup.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, so we will begin. We have Steve Ballone, County Executive. Thank you. You have 3 minutes on the clock.
Good morning, members of the commission. I want to thank you for coming to Suffolk County today. The commission has been tasked with addressing the question of implementing a campaign finance system that would strengthen our democracy by reducing both the perception and reality of corruption in our government. I urge the commission to implement such a system and would point out that it is something that we have adopted on a local level in Suffolk County. However, if this commission is going to truly fulfill its purpose, I urge you, as part of this implementation, to eliminate a system that has had a clear and demonstrable corrupting impact on our politics. I urge you to follow the lead of the overwhelming majority of the states in this nation and eliminate fusion voting once and for all. We have faced significant corruption issues in Suffolk County, and they relate directly back to fusion voting. 3 years ago, I stood on the steps of the district attorney's office just across from this building to call on former district attorney Tom Spoda to resign for running a criminal enterprise out of his office. About a year and a half later, he was indicted by the feds, and he'll be going on trial later this year. It is not possible for me to adequately describe in the time allotted the extent to which individuals and communities have been devastated by the corruption that SPOTA represents. I would point you, however, to one case, the Keith Bush case, for an illustration of what this corruption means. The new district attorney, Tim Sini, upon taking office, created a conviction integrity bureau that found that Bush, a young African-American male in Suffolk County, was beaten and framed for a murder that he did not commit and for which he served 33 years in prison. It is now the longest exoneration case in American history. What I can tell you is this: Tom SPOTA's corruption was facilitated by, empowered by, fusion voting. In 3 election cycles, the voters never had the opportunity to hold SPOTA accountable and have a real choice in his election. SPOTA, a Democrat because of fusion voting, was given every other line, including the Republican line. In SPOTA's case, though, it was even worse. The former Suffolk County Conservative Party chairman, Ed Walsh, was also indicted by the feds and ultimately convicted. The U.S. Attorney's Office, in a pretrial memo, laid out the case that SPOTA was directly protecting Ed Walsh, who consistently provided him cross-endorsements for his reelection. SPOTA refused to investigate Walsh. Walsh orchestrated the lines for SPOTA. That is fusion voting. And SPOTA is not the only one. We have had multiple countywide elections in which voters have been denied any choice whatsoever because of fusion voting. These Putin-style elections make a mockery of our democratic process. This corruption has a cost, and taxpayers are left footing the bill. Moreover, this corruption shatters people's lives. It also has a negative impact on our judiciary. An independent judiciary, both in perception and reality, is critical to our democratic system. And yet, once again, if you look on the ballot line this year, you will find one example after another of voters being denied their right to choose because of fusion voting. In fact, perhaps the biggest joke on the electorate is the phrase, "pick one" on the ballot, which is then followed by the exact same name on every line. It is time to fundamentally restructure our election law in this state to meet the times, to fully implement criminal justice reform, and to usher in a new era of accountability, fairness, and transparency. The state has made great progress in bringing New York's election laws into the 21st century, but you must complete the job. The way to do that is by ending fusion voting. I urge the commission to act on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, next we have James Cole. We have a lot of speakers today. I don't mean to interrupt anyone while you're speaking, but I want to make sure everyone has a chance to do their 3-minute speech today. Thank you very much.
Before I start, let me just say a few people in the room could actually hear the whole conversation that just took place. The microphones are so low. So thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak at this forum. Those who have sought elective office without establishment support, as I have on 2 prior occasions, at both the local and state levels, know the legal process to be a candidate in the state of New York creates purposeful barriers to be a choice for your neighbors to consideration on the ballot. From hard to achieve signature quotas to punitive petition challenges where unsubstantiated claims and frivolous lawsuits can be filed with impunity. In reality, those challenges present enough of a disincentive to a non-establishment run for office that what this commission is really here today to codify is not the public financing of campaigns for all candidates. It's to ensure the public financing of campaigns for their candidates. If this weren't the case, you would be more clearly taking up the issue of public financing of campaigns and ballot access instead of just the former. But my testimony today is not a judgment on whether public financing of campaigns should or should not be a part of election reform in our state. It is instead a criticism of the device being used by lawmakers and Governor Cuomo to reach into the pockets of hardworking taxpayers in a way that is in sharp contrast to the spirit and letter of the New York State Constitution they each took an oath to uphold. For the embarrassingly few number of people that chose to attend the hearings for the Legislative Pay Raise Commission that were held in 2018, apparently by the size of the crowd today, threatening power gets more attention than the spending of our money. My testimony today will be very similar to commentary I made when I spoke before that other unelected, unaccountable body. As I had predicted in my remarks that November, the abdication of legislative responsibility and power was not a one-off unconstitutional delegation. It was a starting point. I also previously took an oath to the New York State Constitution when I was sworn in as a New York City police officer at the age of 24. For 21 years, I took that oath and the powers and limitations it bestowed very seriously. I took it so seriously, in fact, that in 2013, I started a not-for-profit called ChangeNYS.org to promote civic education and the importance of constitutional study in our state. So you also, these commissioners, took an oath to uphold the state constitution. So what are the constitutional violations in question today? We start with the fact that this public financing board has been authorized with the ability to magically have their recommendations transformed into the force of law as authorized by the April budget. The false premise that the legislature and governor can give away their constitutionally allocated role in lawmaking to a hand-picked committee is so obviously unconstitutional. New York's Constitution is crystal clear on who has the ability to make law, and it makes no reference to a committee such as the one before me today. If the legislature and the governor can delegate away their lawmaking power on the specific issues of public financing of campaigns and the spending of taxpayer money, what other areas of lawmaking is the legislature and governor authorized to delegate power to other forums such as this? When the state legislature gave away its power to redistrict following the results of the next constitutionally mandated census, it required a constitutional amendment. In the end, the question is whether we, the voters, have the right and power to hold our elected officials accountable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yet again, my fellow New Yorkers
Testimony is totally
will be
unhelpful
stuck
to our
with the bill.
process. Please
Thank you.
My testimony is unhelpful.
We have a legislative mandate. We will fulfill that mandate. Criticizing the mandate doesn't allow us to move forward with fulfilling it.
But
So
I have the
you have
right to
stated your
testify because
position.
I'm paying for this
Down.
commission. I'm paying
Well,
for this
well,
commission.
thank you, Commissioner.
And I'll be
Booker.
paying the bill
However,
for the $100 million that New Yorkers will be accountable
thank you, Mr. Cole. We appreciate your testimony. Now we'll move on. I'll become a little stricter with the 3-minute rule because I want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak today. We have Assemblyman Phil Ramos. Please come up. Thank you. I'll be strict with the 3 minutes too, Mr. Ramos. Sorry, starting with you.
Assemblyman Phil Ramos, Deputy Majority Leader of the Assembly. I stand united with the thousands of New York residents who want public financing as a way to assure that our democracy is not further dismantled in this state. New York has a big money problem. In 2018 election, the top 100 donors in New York gave more to candidates than all of the estimated 137,000 small donors combined. And it will be no surprise to anyone that the majority of these donors are overwhelmingly wealthy, white, and male, compared to both the low dollar contributors and to voters as a whole. New York ranks amongst the worst states in the nation when it comes to small donors. Small donors make up the smallest source of funding to candidates in New York State. And in the 2018 election, with just 5% of the money raised by candidates coming from small donors. Following the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, small donors matching funds remains the most powerful solution to counter the unlimited secret money that's flowing into our elections. New York has a chance to create a model for nations by becoming the first state since Citizens United to pass comprehensive campaign reform. Small donor public financing gives the everyday people means to run for office and represent their communities. And I urge the commission to please implement this system and as soon as possible. In regards to fusion voting, I believe that should be decoupled from the other issues. They're two totally separate issues. The commission should not alter or diminish fusion voting, which is wholly unrelated to public financing. The fusion voting is good for democracy. We see at the federal level our democracy being dismantled, and we have a chance here in New York to be able to make our democracy better. It's good for democracy, and everybody doesn't fit into a neat box of Democrat and Republican. Citizens who support third parties still deserve the right to participate in politics. At a time when our country, at the federal level, we have a president who's polarized from our Congress and our Senate. We have a Senate who's polarized from our Congress. We have Republicans polarized from Democrats. And we have the individuals down at the ground level, U.S. citizen against U.S. citizen. How on earth would we advocate for doing away with a system in which two parties can work together on common ground? Why would we do that in the present climate of polarization in our country? So I urge the commission to take that position and maintain fusion voting and support campaign financing reform.
Thank you. Thank you for staying within the 3 minutes. Skylar Johnson.
Hello, and thank you for allowing me to speak today. So, my name is Skylar Johnson. I manage the town council race Sarah Diana ran for council in Brookhaven. Besides managing that race, I'm getting ready to run for public office myself. When I tell people I'm going to run, I expect certain questions. These are generally, what's your platform? How do you feel about this issue? And how can you afford it? The question of whether or not I can afford to run is the most frustrating question I receive. Don't get me wrong, my feelings are not with those who ask the question, but with the fact that they have to ask the question. We have built a system where the general public believes that their voice does not matter because it can always be drowned out by those with wealth. Let's say a school teacher wants to run. She's well liked in the community and is intelligent and savvy enough that she can navigate her way through any office she wants to hold. She goes out into the community and asks for donations. She receives over 100 donations spanning from $10 to $100. It's evident that the people want to see her have a fair shot at winning. Unfortunately, her competitor dropped $20,000 on the race and is raising thousands more from big corporations and his wealthy friends. The school teacher, despite being a better candidate, cannot spread her message in the same capacity her wealthy competitor can, and does not have a fair shot at getting elected. The amount a candidate raises is often used to judge his or her viability. Besides the fact that judging a candidate on funds leads to an imbalance, it puts candidates on the wrong path. While campaigns like mine will be grassroots, other candidates may feel pressure to take funds from giant corporations who can influence the decisions a candidate makes once they become an elected official. In speaking to thousands of voters, one common theme presents itself: politicians are corrupt. I believe this largely stems from the financing issues we are discussing today. The people are afraid that elected officials can be bought. They see tens of thousands of dollars in donations not from people, but from real estate corporations and big industry that will benefit from a specific candidate's election. People do not want to vote or even talk to candidates because of this issue. If we establish new rules, we can reinstate the public's faith in our democratic system. I know some of you are worried about the cost of this program. I'm worried about the cost of not putting this program in place. If we do not finally put these rules in place, we allow the fundamental basis of our democracy to be undermined. If you're worried about the cost of healthcare or education or anything else, we need to create this public financing program. We can then elect the people into our government who are passionate and who will make a difference based on the people. I appreciate the time today, and I hope that New York will champion this legislation and help create a new age of elections.
Thank you. Assemblyman Michael Montalbano.
Good morning, members of the commission. My name is Michael Montesano. I'm the Assemblyman for the 15th Assembly District in Nassau County. You know, this morning we talk about the funding of the campaign, and right now New York State faces a $2.5 billion deficit. We're looking to spend $100 million a year to fund this program, and that's not talking about how much money has to go out the door to meet the candidates' demands. The system that's being proposed, in my opinion, will not prevent the powerful labor unions, lobbyists, or super PACs, or huge corporations from influencing the political system. The Supreme Court missed the mark on that when it ruled in Citizens versus United. It simply takes money from the ordinary taxpayer and puts it into the politicians' campaign accounts. It tears down one of the most critical barriers in our political system, the one between campaign resources and taxpayer-funded resources. It's good policy that government employees can't log hours while they're working for a campaign. It's good policy that government resources can't be used to create campaign materials. Why would it be okay to deposit taxpayer dollars directly into campaign accounts? If we look for the irregularities that follow this type of public campaign financing, we just need to look into New York City. In its last cycle, it saw 77 cases of corruption with public campaign financing, which resulted in $2.16 million of misappropriated funds being paid out of taxpayer dollars to these campaign accounts that had to be recovered. While I think we need to have some reformation in the way campaigns run and the way they're financed, I don't believe it should be to the cost of taxpayer dollars. Right now, we have a problem in New York. We have billions of dollars on unmet infrastructure needs. We have homelessness. We have struggling schools. We have ongoing heroin and opioid epidemics. And to waste $100 million a year on funding the campaigns of elected candidates, I think is inappropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Joseph Sackman.
Good morning. My name is Joe Sackman. I'm a volunteer national coordinator for Wolfpack New York, which is a nonpartisan grassroots organization dedicated to ending corruption at all levels of our government. We advocate for an amendment to the United States Constitution reforming our broken campaign finance system. I am also a steering committee member for Long Island Activist, a progressive group dedicated to making Long Island a better place for all, as well as a committee member of the Nassau County Democratic Party. There are many important issues I care about, such as creating an environmentally sustainable society, safer communities, and an end to the opioid epidemic, and a healthcare system that puts people before profit. Yet one issue ties them all together, the issue of money and politics. Wealthy elites, industry lobbies, and special interests stand in the way by preventing our government from dealing with these issues. Those who have money have influence over our government, while those who without don't. A Princeton study by Martin Gillens and Benjamin Page showed this to be true. Their findings can be summed up as follows. The central point that emerges from our research is that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on U.S. government policy, while mass-based interest groups and average citizens have little or no independent influence. A majority of Americans agree that political corruption is tied to money and politics and that something must be done about it. Even our own state senator, Charles Schumer, said the following at a rally this July when Senator Udall introduced an amendment to overturn Citizens United, the Supreme Court case that has become synonymous with corruption. Few decisions in the 200 and some odd years in this republic have threatened our democracy like Citizens United. People say they want to get rid of the swamp. Citizens United is the embodiment of the swamp. Overturning Citizens United is probably more important than any other single thing we can do to preserve this great and grand democracy. Until we as a nation enact reforms on the national level, super PACs and dark money groups will continue to plague us. Foreign powers will be able to launder their money and influence elections through these groups. Men and women like George Soros, William Koch, and Betsy DeVos will buy their way into the government. Corporations will lobby and write our laws. It will continue to go unchallenged till states like New York step up and fight back. New York can be a leader in this fight to preserve our grand democracy. This commission is charged with creating an important necessary component to this end by implementing a permanent small donor public financing system for our elections. It should be a system available for primary and general elections with a minimum of a 6-to-1 match on small donations. It must have lower contribution limits for participating and non-participating candidates and include an independent enforcement unit. Publicly financed elections are an opportunity for representation that is tied closely to the community. Candidates invested in seeking out the support of the community will expose themselves to the diverse needs of the constituency. It would also promote greater interaction between the candidate and the electorate. This system has the potential to restore and reinvigorate public confidence in our elections. Knowing the needs of the primary concern of those they elect can only help them make our representative democracy stronger.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So next we have a senator from the Bronx, Alexandra Biaggi. No, I'm not being biased. I'm just from the Bronx too, guys. Okay. And part of Westchester. So there you go. You have two here. Yes, great, Ms. Biaggi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I would first like to thank the Commission for agreeing to be part of this rare opportunity to reshape and to improve the representative democracy of New York State. As you know, my colleagues and I approved a budget which created this historic moment you have before you. A moment that gives you the chance to place New York at the forefront of democracy by implementing a robust public financing program that will empower citizens, reduce the dangerous influence of money in politics, and ultimately level the playing field for qualified candidates. Additionally, you have been tasked with examining, evaluating, recommending new laws and the parameters on how the state should implement a system of voluntary public campaign financing for state, legislative, and statewide public offices. Your recommendations are to further the goals of incentivizing candidates to solicit small contributions, reducing the pressure on candidates to spend inordinate amounts of time, wasting time to be perfectly honest, raising large campaign contributions, and in stimulating qualified candidates to run for office. The statute before you is clear that the commission is to be focused only on matters relevant to establishing a public financing program, and the commission should stay focused on its original intent to, quote, examine, evaluate, and make recommendations for new laws with respect to how the state should implement such a system of voluntary public campaign financing. Fusion voting is a constitutionally protected voting right and has been part of New York's elections since before the Civil War. 3 times in the last 100 years, powerful politicians have attempted to roll back our right to fusion voting, and those efforts have been blocked every time by the highest court in the state, the New York State Court of Appeals. We expect the same result in court if the commission acts beyond its intended scope by ultimately deciding to sacrifice fusion voting. As we've heard several times today, not everyone fits neatly into the Democratic or Republican Party box. Citizens who support a third party still deserve the right to participate in politics in a meaningful and effective way. Fusion voting is the vehicle which allows third-party members and supporters to vote without spoiling or wasting their vote on a candidate with no chance of actually winning. Under the state's fusion system, voters can vote for a candidate who can actually win, but also vote for that candidate on a party line whose values they want to support. Let me be very clear. I am not interested in wasting our time or in wasting my time to engage in political wars. We have too much to do, and too many New Yorkers are relying on us to make progress. The relentless fight for a wholly democratic process, welcoming participation in our elections is why I am here. The influence of money in politics is undeniably disturbing and undemocratic, but the influence of money in politics in this state places New York in a league of their own, and that league is the antithesis of ethical. It is a league riddled with the relics of Tammany Hall, corruption, and most importantly, with actors who don't have New Yorkers' best interest in mind. Don't let the legacy of this commission be a missed opportunity to alter that influence. Please focus on your intended scope and leave fusion voting.
Thank you very much. Next we have Michelle Lamberti. No, Michelle Lamberti. Oh, there we go. And after her, we'll have Senator Phil Boyle, just to get you ready.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Lamberti, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Nassau County. On behalf of the League, I want to thank the Commission for this opportunity to speak about campaign finance reform and a small donor matching system for New York State. We believe that in addition to public campaign financing, strong, effective, independent, and adequately funded enforcement, and much lower limits on all campaign contributions, including contributions to parties, are fundamental to reforming New York's broken campaign finance laws. The League urges the following critical reforms. We need to reduce contribution limits for all candidates, not just those participating in a public matching system. New York currently has by far the highest contribution limits of the 39 states that limit contributions, of which $69,700 for statewide office is the most egregious example. This has the inexorable result of focusing candidates on larger contributors and organized interests. Contribution limits for all candidates, not just those participating in public matching, should be lowered to levels more consistent with federal limits, including contributions to party committees and party transfers to candidates. It is critical that the Commission lower contribution limits across the board for all candidates in order to avoid discouraging candidates from participating in the public matching system. We need to establish an independent campaign enforcement agency outside the Board of Elections to enforce campaign finance laws for all candidates. Experience to date with the Enforcement Division within the State Board of Election has not been positive. New York City has a separate campaign finance board that has jurisdiction over all candidates. Similarly, we strongly believe that the same board that administers the public matching system should enforce campaign finance laws for all candidates. We need to further reduce or eliminate entirely contributions by all lobbyists and contractors doing business or seeking to do business with the state. The legislative session in Albany is notoriously replete with continual fundraising from lobbyists and special interests, and this particular reform is long overdue. There are many examples from other states of effective pay-to-play restrictions, as well as New York City's extensive system. We need to place reasonable limits on party housekeeping accounts at all levels. Currently, there are no limits. Like the recently closed LLC loophole, housekeeping money has long been a major source of avoidance of New York State's already weak contribution limits. And finally, there should be new reporting requirements instituting complete disclosure for bundlers of contributions similar to those in New York City. Establishment of a small donor public matching system without these other reforms will diminish the likelihood that candidates will participate in the new system. It will allow the status quo in which organized interests and large contributions have an undue influence in Albany to continue. We ask the Commission to institute a long overdue complete reform of New York's campaign finance laws. On behalf of the League, I want to thank the Commission for inviting us and wish them well in the task before them.
Thank you very much. We have Senator Phil Boyle. And after him will be Lisa Tyson.
My name is Phil Boyle. I'm the senator for the 4th District. I'd like to thank the commissioners for their time. I'm sorry. I would like to, there are 2 letters I have regarding fusion voting. I'm not going to talk about public financing. Two letters, one signed by Democratic state senators. I'm not going to read the whole thing of interest in time. Just says, for more than a century, the New York State fusion system has allowed voters to express their values without spoiling close elections. Across the country, Democratic elected leaders are championing measures to strengthen voting rights and democracy. Limiting voter choice by banning fusion voting would move our state in the wrong direction. A letter signed by Republican senators. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Fusion voting, banning fusion voting would eliminate or limit voter choice. Fusion voting allows independent and disaffected voters who often refuse to vote on the major party lines the option of voting for their preferred candidate on either another party line without going on the Republican or Democratic line. It also allows candidates from other political perspectives to run. There have been candidates elected from the Green Party, the Liberal Party, the Working Families Party, the Independence Party, the Conservative Party, and without a doubt, these would probably have never been elected without fusion voting, allowing other candidates from other parties. Most importantly, perhaps, is taxpayer funding. If fusion is eliminated, then you will have up to 8 or more candidates for each position. Think about that. Every single candidate, most without a chance of winning, are going to be getting public financing. Over the course of years, it's going to take billions of dollars away from things like improving our schools and protecting our environment and giving taxpayer money back to hardworking taxpayers. Who signed these letters? Senator John Flanagan, Senator Ken LaValle, Senator Phil Boyle, Senator Andrew Lanza, Senator Daphne Jordan, Senator Betty Little, Senator George Amador, Senator Joe Griffo, Senator Patty Ritchie, Senator Jim Tedesco, Senator Jim Seward, Senator Fred Akshar, Senator Pan Helmy, Senator Rich Bunke, Senator Tom O'Mara, Senator Patrick Gallivan, Senator Chris Jacobs, Senator Rob Bort, Senator Mike Ranzenhofer, Senator Joe Robach, Senator Sue Serino, Senator Jessica Ramos, Senator Brian Benjamin, Senator Alexander Briaggio, who we just heard from, Senator Neil Breslin, Senator Andrew Gounardes, Senator Pete Harcum, Senator Brad Hoylman, Senator Robert Jackson, Senator Liz Kruger, Senator John Liu, Senator Rachel May, Senator Shelley Mayer, Senator Jan Metzger, Senator Montgomery, Senator Myrie, Prasad, Rivera, Salazar, Sanders, Serrano, Skoufis, Stavisky, Kavanaugh, Bailey, Carlucci, and Kennedy. 47 of the 62 state senators signed this letter supporting fusion voting. Who didn't sign? Ironically, the 5 Democratic state senators who live in or represent part of Nassau County. I can't imagine why that is, but that just happens to be the fact. Also, Senator Carlucci and Antonacci, who is currently running for Supreme Court, he felt he could not sign. 47. Thank you. Thank you.
Lisa Tyson.
Could you give those letters to our, could you hand those letters up, please, Senator?
Can we have the letters? Thank you. Oh, great, you have 10? And then 9, I mean, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Tice. I'm director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. We are a multi-issue grassroots citizen-run organization dedicated towards social, economic, and racial justice.
We strongly believe that a democracy must amplify the voices of everyday New Yorkers in the political process. We've been working on public financing of elections for close to 2 decades. Just 2 years ago, we were in this room passing public financing of elections in Suffolk County. We are really excited and hope that you do the same as well. We're really pushing the commission to do that. We're ready to celebrate now. We want you to create a permanent program launched by January 2022. Establish a permanent small donor public financing program for both primary and general elections. Include at least a 6-to-1 match on small donations. Significantly lower limits for all candidates. Ensure qualifying thresholds enable incumbents and challengers with grassroots supports to participate. Create an independent enforcement agency that oversees campaign finance law for all candidates. Clearly, we have a problem, a big money problem in New York State. You've heard these numbers before. The top 100 donors gave more to candidates than 137,000 small donors combined. Significant problem. By matching small donations with public funding, we can amplify the voices of everyday New Yorkers, including women, people of color, working and middle class, and any and all underrepresented New Yorkers in the political process. With small donor matching, candidates can focus on raising small donations from their constituents instead of seeking large checks from special interest and out-of-district donors. Small donor public financing gives everyday people the means to run for office and represents their community while relying on small donations instead of large checks. And unsurprisingly, candidates of color and women have less access to wealthy white donor pools. If we want our government to represent all of society, then we need a system that encourages people from all walks of life to consider serving in public office. We are hearing from some people that they do not think that we should be paying for such a system. Well, you are on Long Island right now. We have had Senator Skelos. We have had County Executive Mangano. We have had our supervisor, Vendetto. Each of them are on their way or in jail because of corruption. If you do not think that there is cost to corruption and cost to a system that we have right now, you are wrong. We will save a lot of money by implementing this program. So it should not be stopped by cost. We're also asking that the commission does not focus on irrelevant distractions like attempting to eliminate fusion. This is crucially important to the Long Island Progressive Coalition. We were one of the original founding members. I remember getting signatures signed for the party. This is very offensive to the democracy we believe that we have helped to create in New York State. We strongly believe that fusion and the existence of third parties are critical to a democracy, and we believe you should as well. We're watching the commission, and we're expecting you to deliver the model public financing program that the governor promised us. Thank you.
Thank you. We have next Assemblyman Joe DeStefano. DeStefano.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Good morning. This is my first, I'm the first go-around assemblyman, so I come from my community of, I've been a volunteer fireman for 40 years. I decided to run for office last year, so this is my maiden voyage. Raising money, I understand, is a very difficult proposition being a newcomer to the system. However, I represent part of the entire town of Brookhaven, and I in Suffolk County as well, is the 3rd Assembly District where I represent. Let's start with the infrastructure that we're going to be sacrificing to do this. $100 million. If people haven't noticed when they were on their way here today, the roads around us are crumbling. And unfortunately, a lot of that money would go to good use in doing goods for the roads that we all drive on every single day. So our struggling schools, I mean, every year, this is my first year in Albany, and all we did for the half of the year that I can remember is talk about education and trying to get more money for our educational system. When I go to Board of Education meetings and things like that, they're always asking for more money because they need to do more, but they constantly get less. This year, they happen to get a few dollars more, but it was one of those things where you have to fight to the death to get it. Robocalls, endless messages. I don't know when this time of the year, when you go home, your box is flooded with mail from candidates. I get mail from both sides of the aisle. And when I talk to the people in my district, they're aggravated with that. They don't want to see that. And if we're going to finance that with public money, they want to know, what are you doing for me? I don't care who's running. I'll vote for the person I believe is the best for the position that they're running for. I don't need to be told this is what I'm going to do with my money that I'm paying tax money for. And they don't want to be told that $6 for every dollar that I raise, I would benefit from it. But I'm against it because it's not the right thing to do with public money. Our political removes choice of our democracy. It puts it in the hands of those who know how to manipulate the system. Do you think that if someone is willing, they're going to go around the system somehow, somewhere, they'll find a way to funnel the money to where it wants it to go? I am a grassroots guy. I come from labor. I worked for the sheriff's department for 27 years. There's nobody better that would benefit from a program like this. But I believe that it should come from the people who I represent and the constituents that I represent, because they're the ones that I relate to the most. It's not the grand scheme of things. It's not everything that people want, but there's good valid arguments on both sides of the aisle. It's just that, in my opinion, it's one of those things that I don't believe that giving public taxpayers money when there's so many other things that we're short on in this state. Education, as I mentioned. Why take the freedom away from the constituents that we represent? Let them decide who it is that they want to support, not because they have to support everybody that's running for office. I thank you for the time, and I look forward to working with you guys.
Thank you very much. We have Luke Elliott Negri.
Thanks so much to the commission for providing the opportunity to testify, and forgive me in advance for trying to squeeze 6 minutes of testimony into 3 minutes. I'm going to speak quickly. My name is Luke Elliott Negri. I live in Port Washington. We just at the start of this testimony heard Suffolk County Executive Steve Bellone talk about eliminating fusion voting in the interest of creating an independent judiciary. He's right that backroom deals have an outsized influence on our system of judicial selection, but fusion voting is not the root of the problem, and violating the state constitution will not solve this problem. So I'm going to do a crash course in how we end up with judges in the state. Supreme Court judges in New York are nominated at conventions held after the primary election. Under election law, these conventions are called and often convened by party chairs. In order to serve as a convention delegate, a party member must be nominated by petition, a process that party organizations engage in regularly, but that is prohibitively complicated and time-consuming for individual party activists. Overall, this system gives party organizations and their chairs immense power over the selection of judicial candidates. One needn't look any further than the current Supreme Court ballot here in Long Island, where the Democratic and Republican parties have cross-endorsed the same 6 candidates. This could not happen without an arrangement between chairpersons Schaefer and Garcia here in Suffolk and the Republican Democratic counterparts in Nassau. But that arrangement would not be possible if county chairs didn't control the judicial nominations from start to finish. With party chairs in control, there are no primaries for these judicial offices. Candidates do not circulate petitions, and they do not run in primaries. They are selected at these conventions, which are controlled by the county party leaders, and then appear on the November ballot. The minor parties, the fusion parties, are irrelevant. Fusion is irrelevant in this process. The Democratic and Republican county leaders control who gets on the ballot and then on the bench. I should note that the WFP did run judges against the Democrats once in Brooklyn and got about 1/3 of the vote, and I'm told the Conservative Party sometimes plays a role in judicial races. But this system is designed by the two major parties for the benefit of the two major parties. Mr. Bellone wrote an op-ed in Newsday recently, didn't hide his disdain for this system, but he was too polite to mention that the county leader of his own party is a leading beneficiary and participant in the current system. But even as he is correct about the problem, eliminating or restricting fusion voting will do little to fix it. The proper way to do away with this problem is to reduce the power of party leaders in the process of judicial nominations. I can imagine 2 ways to do this. We could establish a nonpartisan merit system, or we could pick the nominees via primaries, like we do with every single other seat in this state, other than in special elections, which she should address at some point as well. Either way, as commissioners, Berger and Nona and Getachow are deeply aware the most important step this commission can take is to increase voter choice, is to adopt a robust system of public financing that amplifies the voices of small donors and ordinary voters. But insofar as fusion voting is concerned, any claims that it is a source of corruption should be taken with an enormous grain of salt. The constitutionally protected right to fusion voting should be left alone. Please, please keep your eyes on the prize of a public financing system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Bridget Foley. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. Yes, Suffolk County Legislator Bridget Fleming.
You scared me. Good morning, members of the Public Campaign Financing Commission. Thank you so much for your hard work, and I appreciate your being here on Long Island to hear our concerns. My name is Bridget Fleming. I serve in the Suffolk County Legislature for the 2nd Legislative District, and I am speaking in support of the establishment of a small donor public financing program. We have the opportunity here in the state of New York to set a nationwide model for real campaign finance reform that will empower the citizens that we are elected to serve to effectively participate in the political process as is necessary for the proper functioning of our democratic system. Here in Suffolk County, we have adopted a local law that establishes a fair election matching fund with strict restrictions on expenditures, transparent reporting requirements, and effective enforcement. Under the sponsorship of Deputy Presiding Officer Rob Calarco, I and many others co-sponsored the bill. Adopted by the legislature and signed by County Executive Steve Bellone after extensive debate and negotiation, it sets up a small donor matching system that will open the door for more people to seek public office and to effectively participate in the political process, not just the wealthy, well-connected, and narrow special interests. The matching program goes into full effect in 2021. The motivation for the matching program is just as present statewide and nationwide as it is here in Suffolk County. Increasingly, the citizens of our county, state, and nation believe that their government is unresponsive to the problems and the concerns of ordinary people, that the flow of money from wealthy individuals and narrow special interests to political campaigns is a root cause of government dysfunction, favoritism, and corruption. That a powerful few use campaign contributions to gain extraordinary access to and favorable consideration from government officials. As the role of money in our politics increases, especially after Citizens United, elected officials at all levels of government find themselves devoting much of their time and energy to fundraising and less, unfortunately, with the best of intentions, of our time to our official duties. Studies have shown that voter participation is dramatically increased when public funding is made available to candidates who have agreed to abide by fundraising, spending, and reporting limits in their campaigns for public office. Establishment of a small donor matching program will go a long way toward remedying the ills that prevent our system for working for ordinary individuals. It will reduce political corruption and the appearance of favoritism and cronyism by decreasing the influence of big money donors. I thank you for your efforts, and I urge the Commission to establish an effective and strictly enforced public finance.
Thank you very much.
Excuse me, I
Thank
do
you.
have one question. I just have one question. You stated that Suffolk County has implemented its own public financing program that will become fully effective in 2021.
That's right.
How do you envision?
I'm sorry, it's not fully effective. It starts for legislators in 21. Countywide officials will be, it'll be available to countywide officials in 2023.
So if this commission comes up, when we come up with a public financing program that becomes effective, how do you envision Suffolk's working with ours?
I'm proud to be part of the team that has led the way in showing that the public in Suffolk County supports such a program. So it's my hope that our efforts will make your job easier and that we've demonstrated that there is public support. If and when I hope you are able to establish a commission and set up a public program, I'll leave it to the lawyers to figure out how we work together to ensure that it works. We led the way on for instance, the ban of single-use plastics, and that has happened. We discussed vaping limits, and it's been adopted at the executive level on the state. And so I do believe once you enact a public campaign financing program, we will be able to work together to figure out how
just
the systems
One
work.
more follow-up, just to be clear, you're only county elected officials. You don't cover the legislative.
Right, that's right.
Okay.
We're the Suffolk County Legislature.
Right.
I'm usually sitting on that side
Right.
of the horseshoe. And so we adopted it to apply first to legislative candidates and then 2 years later to countywide, Suffolk County-wide.
Okay, thank you.
I hope it'll help you, and I'll be happy to submit a written comment that includes the carefully crafted bill if it's helpful to you.
To cover the district attorney
Yes,
too?
all countywide officials. Thank you. I'll be happy to submit in written comments. I don't have it with me today. Do we have a deadline for written comments?
Well, no deadline, but you can send it to our email. We have a general email out. so we will all receive it. As soon as you have a chance, the sooner the better, so we can review it before.
Thank you, and I appreciate your consideration. Deputy Presiding Officer Calarco would be here today, but he is the chair of the operating budget working group, which is working right now in our Riverside location.
On your
Thank you very
budget.
much.
Thank you. Bridget Foley? Bridget Foley? Oh, good.
Hi there. Is this a good volume?
Yes.
Good? Okay, great. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for your time today. I know public hearings like this are always long days. My name is Bridget Foley. I'm from the town of Brookhaven, and I am a young climate activist. When Superstorm Sandy hit, I was a senior in high school, and climate change became real to me that night when my family waded through waist-deep floodwaters, evacuating my house on the South Shore. Today, I am an active member of the Long Island Climate Committee and a volunteer with the Long Island Progressive Coalition, in part because I came of age in the era of the climate crisis, and my entire generation did, and the next generation currently is. In our childhood, adolescence, and young adulthood, we witness unprecedented increases in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, wildfires, superstorms, heat flashes. Those of my generation from environmental justice and frontline communities experience each new climate change impact first and worst. We know that if strong and innovative governmental and economic action is not taken this year and every year going forward, our futures will be a wild card far outside of our control. And that's why I'm counting on the Commission to establish a strong and permanent small donor public financing program this year. We need publicly financed elections in New York State because we know that when the oil and gas industry wants to, it will spend unlimited amounts of money to crush efforts at direct democracy. We saw it happen in 2018 in Washington State, where the industry spent $31.5 million in a campaign to defeat a carbon tax initiative. We also saw it in Arizona, where Proposition 127 would have set a mandate for all state utilities to get 50% of their energy from renewable resources by 2030, but Arizona Public Service Company, the state's largest utility provider, spent almost $22 million on a campaign to successfully knock it down. Earlier this year, New York State passed and signed into law the nation's most ambitious and innovative climate legislation to date, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. I spent the better part of last year in Albany to lobby, rally, and finally risk arrest in protest at the end of the legislation to win the CLCPA. I, along with the entire statewide coalition of climate activists working on behalf of our state's future, know that the CLCPA's passage was just the beginning. So if you don't create a strong and independent small donor public financing program with lower contribution limits on all candidates, we will not be able to stop the oil and gas industry. The next 10 years in New York State are make or break when it comes to climate, and I'm so afraid that it's going to be break because the CLCPA sets targets of net zero 100% clean energy sector wide by 2050, and that will only happen if the State Public Financing Committee creates a strong and permanent public financing system with a matching ratio of at least 6-to-1 that I and my colleagues are asking for. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. We have Assemblyman Walter Mosley.
Good afternoon. My name is Assemblyman Walter Mosley. I represent the 57th Assembly District in Brooklyn, New York, within the New York State Assembly. I spent my entire career studying the laws and constitution of the state, New York State, especially in relation to campaign financing and fusion voting. And today I'm here because I believe that the scope set forth in enacting legislation that created this special commission is in violation of Article 3 of the New York State Constitution. I'm here today to voice my support for fair election proposals that this commission has been asked with deciding. The implementation of a public-funded campaign finance system is critical to increasing participation in the democratic process and revitalizing our constituents' trust in our state government. It's crucial that the system provide at least a 6-to-1 match fund on small donations to ensure that participating candidates are able to raise significant sums from small donors, cover all statewide and state legislative races for both primary and general elections. It's pivotal that the public financing system happen. The donor class is overwhelmingly currently white and wealthy males. These criteria don't represent the diversity of our state, unfortunately. And because empowering the electorate should be our utmost importance, we need to fund these elections so that we can have a full and robust democracy. New York can be a nationwide leader by enacting this public-funded program, and I strongly urge it to do so. However, while the Commission takes on the important task of examining this issue, I'm deeply concerned by the inclusion of fusion voting within the purview of this Commission. You, as a Commission, should think long and hard about the precedent you're creating by including such a politically charged issue like fusion voting. You are here to improve our democracy and to make it more inclusive. Eliminating fusion voting would do the exact opposite. Fusion voting is unrelated to public finance, and any assertion to the contrary, I believe, is disingenuous. The Commission was formed in response to objections around big money in politics. The statute is clear that the Commission is to be focusing on matters relevant to establishing a public financing program. I highlight that there are multiple cases from our highest court, Court of Appeals, that preserves fusion voting as a state constitutional right, which is why I urge the Commission to make no formal recommendation as it relates to fusion voting. The fusion system is a valuable part of our election system, which gives voters more choices and brings to light more issues. And I strongly believe that any attempt by this Commission ending fusion voting will violate our state's constitution. Do not allow this decision on Public Finance Commission to become stained by ending fusion voting. I trust this commission, and as a member of the state legislature, I believe that in improving our democracy, we don't have to take several steps backwards in eliminating fusion voting.
Thank you very much. We have next Todd Valentine. Oh, no, sorry, no. Leilani Gibson. Okay, yeah.
Hello, my name is Leilani Gibson. I'm a resident of the Bayshore Brentwood district, and growing up in school, you're taught all voices are equal, and with each vote is one person. However, the reality is that some voices are being heard louder than others. Being a young African American female organizer within our society, I dream of making the changes that are necessary to better this community. But at this time, it would be incredibly difficult for someone like me to run for office and win. I don't have the financial resources, neither do my friends or neighbors. And having a system of publicly financed elections, I could run for office and focus on the people that I'm serving. I could win, and I could represent my family and my community. And this is how we level the playing field for anyone in New York State to have the same opportunity. And it's not necessarily who's running for office, it's who's influencing our elected officials to sway these votes. Those with privilege should not be the only ones allowed to speak and be heard. It is incredibly discouraging to see and know the reality in that this current system is that money from big business is needed to sustain position. This is unacceptable. Allowing this practice to continue and not only upholds the inequity, but is telling people like me that I'm not worthy to be treated as an equal. Why should I not have the same amount of opportunity as the next person? What makes me different? This is why we need to set up this public financing system that prioritizes small contributions and allows regular people to be more involved in the system. This would give everyday people the means to run for office and represent the communities that are relying on small donations instead of large checks. Unsurprisingly, candidates of color and women and the working class have less access to wealthy white donor pools. And if we want our government to represent all of society, then we need a system that encourages people from all walks of life to consider serving for public office. I'm hoping that the commission today does the right thing and honors the people of New York State and creates the strongest system of public financing. And hopefully you will see someone like me one day in an election be able to win. So, thank you.
Thank you. Ana Flores Acosta. Are you here, Mr. Costa? All right, good. Didn't see you walking up.
My name is Anna Flores. I am a member and organizer at Make the Road New York. I grew up here in Long Island and I graduated from Brentwood High School. I am here with Make the Road New York to say that, with my fellow members, to say that we need a strong financing system in the state of New York. We want this commission to focus only on public financing and stop any consideration of tampering with fusion voting. I was raised in Brentwood, a working class community mostly of immigrants and people of color. For years, I have seen the disillusionment of my neighbors face after having their rights and needs ignored by those in power. Our public schools have been neglected, and that was true when I was there 6 years ago, and it's true now as I had to go home to my niece who was crying because she couldn't go to school because there was no power in her school. So that makes me question, who is government responsive to if not our youngest and most vulnerable populations? Our rights to live in a safe and healthy home have been ignored. The rights to have equal access for government for us all with competent interpretation and translation services have been trampled on. Every day, members of my community see more evidence of how they're not being listened to. Meanwhile, we see a system in New York that has been set up to respond to the desires of wealthy donors who pad their pockets and the pockets of politicians. We see economic development deals with billions given away to the wealthiest New Yorkers and their corporations, with no real benefit to working class people like me. We see Albany legislators and the government talking about the possibility of providing more funding for schools and affordable housing as a waste of resources, instead as a vital investment to our communities. It is offensive and it is wrong. As a young person, it is easy to just give in to all asceticism, but for too long, our voices have been shut out. But instead, I'm here calling on you to change this broken system. Instead of this system built for mega rich donors, we need a strong public financing system for all of the state elections, built to make our voices heard. It should include a minimum of 6-to-1 matching system, reduced contribution limits for large donors, and an independent oversight unit. If you do this, you will help make sure that our voices like mine, can be heard in this state's democracy. You will make a huge difference. Finally, I want to ask you to set aside the question of fusion voting. It is protected by the state's constitution, and it's a way for voters like mine who are to voice our voices.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Robert Trotta, Suffolk County Legislator. Is he here? All right, we'll have to do a second call. Next, we have Eliana Fernandez.
Good afternoon. My name is Eliana Fernandez, and I am the lead organizer for Make the Road New York on Long Island. I am also a proud Long Island resident, a mother who is raising my family here. I respectively submit the following testimony to this commission on behalf of Make the Road New York to urge the commission to adopt a strong public financing system and to leave fusion voting alone. Make the Road New York is the largest grassroots organization of immigrants and working class people of color in New York. On Long Island, we lead community organizing efforts and provide direct services to community members in both Suffolk and Nassau counties. For years, I have worked on community-led efforts to improve public education, ensure affordable housing, protect immigrants, and more. On each of those issues, we have seen big money who always gets an audience in Albany, black progress, and poison our politics. Super wealthy donors have given money to prioritize charter schools over public schools. Super wealthy donors have given money to black protections for tenants. And super wealthy donors have fueled anti-immigrant campaigns. We need to change that in our state. We need a strong public financing system. By reducing the contribution limits for large donors and implementing a 6-to-1 matching system with an independent oversight unit, New York will take an enormous stride towards leveling the playing field of our democracy. We thus urge you to support a strong public financing system. Finally, we call on you not to try to eliminate fusion voting, which is protected by the state's constitution through this commission. I strongly believe that the fusion is good for our democracy. It gives voters more choices and it's been important to our members. We should be opening up our democracy, not taking choices away. And whatever you view on fusion, it's clear that Governor Cuomo and his allies are trying to use this commission to settle political scores. That's not right. This issue simply should not be part of the public financing discussion. Thank you for your consideration in my testimony.
Thank you very much. Roger Snyder. Roger Snyder. Oh, right here.
Thank you, members of the committee. My name is Roger Snyder. I'm chair of the Green Party of Suffolk County. I was to specifically address the commission on the topic of electoral fusion. Excuse me, I had oral surgery. I'm a little.
Put the mic a little closer. Bring the mic a little closer to you. That'll help. Thank you.
Does that help? Thank you. New York State is one of only a handful of states that allow candidates to run on multiple party lines in a process known as fusion voting. The chance to be listed on multiple party lines provides an incentive for candidates and their supporters to attempt to gain the lines of other parties with or without the knowledge of those parties, and potentially to seek those lines in unethical and illegal ways. Cross endorsements and stealing of party lines under fusion voting, which disproportionately hurt minor parties and distort elections, must end in New York State. We have seen the problems right here in Suffolk County. We have Board of Elections employees misrepresent themselves and forge signatures on petitions in order to get candidates from their party on the Green Party line. This seems to be business as usual, as they apparently are still employed with the Board of Elections. In next month's election in my hometown of Huntington, there's a candidate on the Green Line that appears to be running no campaign. Neither I nor the press can reach her. But apparently, as a relative of a town employee, appears to be on the line simply to influence the election. Fusion voting is used and abused by people in backroom deals and unethical campaigning. It dilutes the voice of political parties by watering down what a party really stands for, as we have candidates who don't represent the party's views, making a muddle of the party's unique message. Voters become confused about what a party or a candidate stands for on issues. A member in the past who were a candidate on the conservative or right to life lines was also on the liberal line who was trying to get the Green Party line, despite the fact that these party platforms directly contradict each other. On the other hand, when parties run their own candidates, democracy is better served. I've noted that when minor party candidates are present in debates, the debates change to include issues that are not addressed, where minor parties are represented as merely another letter after a candidate's name. And voters get real choice. Real choice is not that you get to vote for the same candidates on a different line on the ballot. Fusion voting has too long failed the voters of New York State in numerous ways. Fusion leads to corruption, feeds unhealthy patronage, encourages backroom deals, limits voters' choice by allowing one candidate to run on multiple party lines, dilutes what third parties stand for, and betrays party members. It gives undue power to party bosses and political deal makers. We've seen that repeatedly throughout New York State. Fusion needs to end in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have James Brown. And after him, it'll be Virginia Capone.
Hello, my name is Jim Brown. I'm Secretary of the Green Party of Nassau County, and I want to thank the members of the Finance Reform Commission for holding this important hearing today, dealing with campaign finance reform and fusion. There's much apathy among voters in New York State. There's cynicism for the whole pay-to-play system that's in effect. And the Green Party believes that having strong campaign finance reform and ending fusion will go a long way in bringing increased democracy to New York State politics.
The Green Party review campaign financing as limiting the corrupt power of large private special interests and also expanding democracy by increasing the ability of smaller parties and independents to fairly participate in the political system. There should be a level playing field where ideas compete, not where the influence of money reigns supreme. One person, one vote, not $1, one vote. Reform of the current system of campaign finance should also enable office holders to deal better with the concerns of constituents on an ongoing basis, not having to constantly raise funds for the next election. However, the Green Party does have criticisms of the current matching funds system in New York City and also what has been suggested by Governor Cuomo. Matching fund systems do not adequately limit the amounts of private funding, have high thresholds, and can actually multiply the differences between candidates and funding. Matching funds essentially add supplements to private campaign funding. They don't get to the root of the problem. These systems also heavily favor the two major parties and incumbents, and matching funds, in our estimation, do not adequately expand or foster true democracy. We advocate total full public campaign financing known as clean money, clean elections, which is a grant-based system that is currently employed by Arizona and Maine and to some extent by Connecticut. And this type of approach has the ability to augment the number of candidates and takes more money out of the system. Clean money, clean elections is proven, unlike matching fund systems, to create a more level playing field among candidates and political parties, limiting the power of big donors. Regarding fusion, we urge the commission to ban it. The Green Party is the only ballot party that consistently eschews fusion. We run our own candidates. We're proud of our platform. We are proud of our point of view. And the opportunity to ballot, which my colleague Roger Snyder discussed, is a horror in the political system and should be eliminated. Eliminating fusion will eliminate that stealing of ballot lines, also cut out patronage and such. We
Thank
urge
you very
a
much.
ban of fusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Virginia Capon?
Good afternoon. I'm a lifelong resident of Suffolk County and a practicing attorney and have been very active in our local politics for well over 10 years. Since 2012, I have served as the president of the Three Village Democratic Club, which covers the North Shore of Brookhaven Town around Stony Brook University. We number about 500, and our basic mission is to give voters access to and information about Democratic candidates seeking elective office. I want to relay to you the views of my organization on public financing of campaigns and the practice of cross endorsements, or what they call fusion voting. Simply put, we believe that public financing is the only way to get money out of politics. And cross endorsements create one of the biggest problems in our local community here on Long Island. Cross endorsements result in less voter choice on election day, not more. The voters really don't get to decide. The decision of who gets to get on the ballot is made well before election day by the party leaders. And the result is that all too often they can decide to give the voters no choice at all, with the same person occupying all the lines on the ballot. Without having to qualify for a line on the ballot in their own right, minor parties can essentially extort the very small margin of victory that we see in most of our elections these days, and they use this to force perfectly viable candidates off the ballot. I have seen this firsthand with parties such as the Independence Party. I'm including in my testimony an article from Newsday from 2013. In that year, Lori Baldessari, a Democrat, was running for Brookhaven Town Clerk. Because of pressure put on the Democratic Party by the leader of the Independence Party, Laura Baldessari was forced to step down from her race because the Independence Party threatened to withhold its endorsement of many other Democrats that year, who unfortunately depended on getting that Independence Party line on the ballot. Cross endorsements really must be stopped. I urge the Commission to address this problem in its final decision. We must relegate the Wilson Pakula to the dustbin of history. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Henninger.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Henninger, and I'm the Vice President of the Stony Brook College Democrats, and I'm also the Long Island Chairman of the College Democrats of New York. I'm here today to voice my opposition of the practice of fusion voting and to advocate for the banning of this practice. Throughout history, the state of New York has not done its part to properly maintain democratic voting practices. College students especially have taken notice of this, whether it has been clumsy ballots, confusing voting deadlines, terribly long lines, especially on college campuses like Stony Brook, or antiquated registration systems. New York has had a history of voting issues. While it is true that the current governor and the legislature have made great strides in this area, especially last legislative session, there are still clear issues in our voting system. The presence of fusion voting is one such issue. Fusion voting is not a good democratic practice. Candidates should not be allowed to run on multiple party lines, especially when there are clear ideological differences between the parties, just to ensure their election. When a candidate appears on the Democrat, Republican, Independent, Conservative lines, it is effectively guaranteeing their victory. We have seen this issue in candidates across Long Island, most notably of the corrupt former DA Tom Spota. Fusion voting that locks down an office for one particular candidate takes away from the opportunity for a legitimate challenger and thus harms our system of democracy. I'm also here to highlight the problem of fusion voting influencing our judicial system. New York is the only state in the country that allows fusion voting in judicial races. Fusion voting in judicial races takes away from an independent judiciary. Fusion tickets seems to allow backroom deals and corruption to enter our judicial system. This fusion voting also provides political roadblocks for well-qualified judges to run for office. New York State should continue to promote democracy and a fair and independent judiciary and go forth with banning fusion voting. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Joshua Clough.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good afternoon. 12:30.
Oh, good afternoon, yes. My name is Joshua Koff, and I am a student at Stony Brook University. I'm also a proud member of the Stony Brook College Democrats and very proud to be here today to speak to the Commission specifically on the situation of fusion voting. For many people, fusion voting is a virtual non-issue. It's not as exciting as tax reform or foreign policy, nor is it as visible to the general public as building a road or fixing a bridge. But it's just as impactful on the regular everyday citizen of this and many other states. Since before the Civil War, the state of New York has seen the use of fusion voting, allowing for the enabling of some of the most infamous populists and corrupt elected officials we have seen, as well as the exploitation of unassuming voters, tricked into believing that they are voting for a different kind of candidate, only to be duped by intentionally misleading party names. Now, there are those who are in favor of keeping this system in place, and they have legitimate arguments. However, some of their primary arguments are themselves misleading. For starters, those who advocate for fusion voting based on the idea that it enables democracy and for the proliferation of ideas are fundamentally wrong. These parties do not represent different choices or a variation of opinions. They are vehicles for backroom deals and political corruption that New York is infamous for. Voters have the right to support third-party candidates that fit their ideology, but fusion voting is not a tool to do that. In addition, supporters of fusion voting have argued that doing away with it would violate the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment's freedom of association. However, in the 1996 Supreme Court case Timmons v. Twin Cities Area New Party, the court decided that the state of Minnesota's ban on fusion voting did not constitute an undue burden on minor parties, did not violate their freedom of association by virtue of the fact that they could still choose to endorse candidates and not run their own in opposition on the ballot, and stated that Minnesota was within its rights to ban fusion voting so as to uphold the integrity of its elections. It should also be noted that in its decision on fusion voting that bans the state Court of Appeals have guidelines to a constitutional way to ban the practice. Most of the states in our country have already made the realization our great state is currently struggling with, that fusion voting is harmful to the individual voter, whether it be through corrupt favors for political spoils or through the deliberate confusion of voters, and needs to be addressed. It is decidedly an undemocratic form of electioneering, favoring those with financial wealth and political clout, and is reminiscent of the so-called democratic systems that keep corrupt politicians and many of America's enemies in power. The time for eliminating fusion voting has already passed us. Now we're playing catch up. I thank you all for your time, and I hope this has been at least somewhat helpful in your decision.
Thank you very much. Shoshana Hershkowitz.
Good afternoon, thank you. My name is Shoshana Hershkowitz. I am the founder of Suffolk Progressives. We are a grassroots activist organization, and I'm here to discuss both topics. The first thing I want to say about fusion voting, I'm hearing the arguments both for and against it. The big thing is that it has been abused in Suffolk County, and it's not just on the judicial lines. I think that we see candidates for elected office that are running on ideologies that are diametrically opposed. And I believe that that is confusing to the voters. They don't know, are they electing a Democrat or a conservative when they go in to vote? Additionally, perhaps it's confusing to the person going into office who their allegiance is to. So I think that it is something that certainly requires a look. I think it is a separate topic from public financing, but it is certainly something that warrants consideration and reform. Regarding public financing, I am one of the people whose lives it would touch. I am someone who desperately wants to run for office. I've thought about it a bunch of times. I've gotten into those preliminary conversations. And the first question I've been asked 9 times out of 10 is not, why do you want to run? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? The question is, how are you going to raise the money? And I'm a working parent. I'm a lecturer. I work in 3 different places. So I don't know how I'm going to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for the privilege of running for office and then do it again in a couple years if I'm lucky enough to win. It is a deterrent to the working class. It is a deterrent to women. It's a deterrent to people of color. And I just don't have friends who own LLCs. I don't, it's not what suburban moms typically have, in their Rolodex. So I'm here to say that it is vitally important that we allow public financing to be a part of how we do things, because it will allow a more diverse group of people running for office. It will allow for better representation. And I will tell you, as the mother of young children, it will change the landscape for little kids who see people of color, who see minorities, who see women in office, and they think, I can do it too. I say that as a parent, I say it as an educator. So I'm asking you to do what Suffolk County has done. They have set it in place, and they have made it viable for people like me to run in the future. And I think that we need to do that in New York State, because it will make for a better democracy. It will make for a more representative democracy. And it will mean that finally, by, of, and for the people isn't just a really, really catchy slogan. It will mean actual democracy for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Geraldine Malaskan. Geraldine from Pier. Yeah, I was going to butcher your last name, but you can say it. What's your last name? Yes, Maslanka. Thank you.
Hi,
Hello.
my name is Geraldine Maslanka. I'm here today representing PEER, Progressive East End Reformers, a chapter of NIPAN based on the East End of Long Island. PEER is a multi-issue grassroots organization with over 900 members and followers. Our organization has been and will remain active in advocating for public finance reform, and strongly urges the Commission to support a plan with at least a 6-to-1 match on small donors. Ideally, we need to get big money out of the politics at all levels of government. Right now, in Southampton town, The exclusive private club, golf club, Shinnecock Hills, has one of its members, billionaire Michael Bloomberg, lobbying the elected officials in our little town. The club wants the town to shut down a road that passes through the golf course, lest its members have to lay eyes on the little people that actually live there. Public financing with a 6-to-1 match or better on small donations would give ordinary citizens who use that road a fighting chance against billionaires like Mr. Bloomberg. Lowering the contribution limits for all candidates, participants, and non-participants would also help. As things stand now, if he chooses, Mr. Bloomberg can give almost $20,000 to our state senator and nearly $10,000 to our assembly member. How are small donors supposed to compete with that? Covering primary and general elections with a permanent public financing program, together with enforcement independent of the politicians covered by the law, would make our democracy work for everyone, not just big donors. Let's not get sidetracked by irrelevant issues like fusion voting, which is unrelated to public financing. The commission was formed in response to an outcry around big money in politics and not fusion voting. It is imperative that the commission stay focused on that. Instead of government of the golf cart, for the golf cart, and by the golf cart, this commission has an opportunity to make our state elections truly representative of New Yorkers. We do need to level that playing field. It's only fair. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Joan Ritter. Joan Ritter. Here? Good. And after that, we'll have Eugene Pagano, just to get people ready. Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'd like to talk on the topic of threshold minimums within a public financial scenario. My name is Joan Ritter and I'm from Jericho. I believe that if taxpayer money is to be used in a matching program, which possibly could constitute billions of dollars, the parties who will benefit should be required to meet at least a 2% threshold of voters. Forcing minor parties to demonstrate that the taxpayer funds are going to a party with real and provable support will only accomplish a public good and foster transparency. Then the taxpayer, and only then, will the taxpayer know where their money is going and what their money is being wisely spent on. And so I believe that in order for the public funds to be disseminated, they should go to parties with at least a 2% threshold of voters. This is a state with millions of voters in it. Having a 2% threshold for each party should not be a difficult thing for those parties to accomplish if they really do have support, provable support from the voters' constituents. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Eugene Pagano. And after him will be Elizabeth Schneider.
Good afternoon, members of the commission. My name is Eugene Pagano. I'm a lawyer from Oyster Bay. I am a member of the Nassau County Democratic Committee, but these are my views. I'm not speaking for the committee. I do not hold any political or elective office. First, I will be speaking about fusion votings. It apparently is part of the commission's mandate, so I believe you have to address it. It is also my opinion that you may note the constitutional issues, but they are beyond your purview because they are judicial questions. Now, I want to cite some more witnesses, not just those in this room. Editorials from 5 papers across the state in the last 6 years denouncing fusion voting, and all major ones, not little village newspapers. From west to east, the Buffalo News, March 6, 2019. The Albany Times Union, July 18, 2019. The New York Daily News, November 29, 1918. And what a contrast. The New York Post, December 14th, 2013. Newsday, repeated occasions, including August 1st, 2017. Let the minor parties run their own candidates, as the Green Party does. And I also concur in Ms. Ritter's point about all parties that seek public financing should meet some minimum threshold showing that they have some significant appeal to voters and are not just shadow parties, PACs running at masquerading as political parties with ballot lines to to perpetrate the illusion of greater voter choice instead of when it's actually fewer candidates. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Schneider. And after her will be Luis Marcelo.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. Our names are Louis Marzella and Elle Schneider, and we are the public affairs coordinators for Planned Parenthood of Nassau County and Planned Parenthood Hudson-Peconic, respectively. Together, our two affiliates are proud to provide sexual and reproductive health care services for more than 29,240 patients across Nassau and Suffolk counties. Planned Parenthood is committed to ensuring that our communities are empowered in their sexual and reproductive lives and beyond. When our democracy is compromised, our patients and communities are stripped of their power to lead healthy, autonomous lives. Fair elections will ensure that New Yorkers from all walks of life and socioeconomic statuses hold the power to shape public life. To that end, we are here to ask the New York State Public Finance Commission to create an effective public campaign finance program that will uplift the voices of everyday New Yorkers and limit the power of major donors. With the creation of at least a 6-to-1 match on small donations, the Commission has the opportunity to give all New Yorkers a more equitable say in how their communities are governed. For too long, our campaign finance system has worked for the wealthy few at the expense of everybody else, allowing big donors to have an imbalanced influence on important policy decisions in New York State that impact housing, education, healthcare, criminal justice, the environment, and so many more.
This commission has an obligation to address the current imbalance of power and can do that by creating a structure of publicly funded elections. We would be remiss not to acknowledge that the communities we serve across Long Island are already active in civic engagement, but full participation in democracy doesn't end at the right to vote. It also includes the ability to put your name in the hat. Under the current model, campaign fundraising presents an enormous obstacle for everyday people to run for office. With reduced financial barriers to running a successful electoral campaign, New Yorkers from all walks of life will be able to participate in the electoral process, which will result in more equitable and fair representation. Not only would this structure promote justice in government representation, it would also have a notable positive impact on public health because communities that are civically engaged are healthier communities. According to the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, participation in the electoral process, whether by voting, registering others to vote, or volunteering, is associated with better self-reported health, even after controlling for individual and societal characteristics. As a healthcare provider in the community, Planned Parenthood is invested in the ability of our patients to make active, informed decisions that give them autonomy in their personal health, families, and communities. This vision is critical to reproductive justice, a key tenet of which is the right to raise a family in communities that are safe, healthy, and self-determining. As a member of and partner to the Long Island Civic Engagement Table, PPNC and PPHP are devoted to fair elections and support the implementation of a robust system of publicly financed elections. As the Commission, you must create a system that truly allows for community voices to be uplifted and heard, a system that makes our democracy work for all New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Vivian Fisher, and after her will be Judy Gardner.
Good afternoon, and thank you to the Commission for providing this opportunity. My name is Vivian Valoria Fisher. I'm a former Suffolk County legislator and presiding officer, and I'm here today to support the campaign finance reform. It's very sorely needed. A couple of years ago, I decided to run for Congress, and the first question that was asked was, how much money can you raise? Not what was the cutting edge legislation that you proposed for to protect our environment or any other important and pertinent questions. Rather, it was only how much can you raise. But I'm here primarily to speak about fusion voting because I've heard state representatives, say that fusion voting limits the voter's choice. Well, fusion voting is an affront to the democratic process here in New York. And unfortunately, in Suffolk County, we can provide to them some of the most egregious examples. In 2018, for the New York State Supreme Court, there were 7 candidates. 3 of them appeared on the Democratic and Republican lines, and 3 of the winners appeared on the Democratic and Republican lines, and 4 of them appeared on the Democratic, Conservative, and Independent lines. In the years 2009 to 2013, voters of Suffolk County had no choice as to five county-wide elected officials. In 2014, Judith Pascal won by 100% of the vote because she was on the Democratic, Republican, Conservative, and Independent line. In 2013, Spoda won the DA position by 100% because he was on all of the lines. And Angie Carpenter won the position of treasurer because she appeared on every line, 100%. Sheriff DeMarco won by 100%. That was only in 2013. In 2010, Joseph Zawicki won the comptroller seat by 100% of the vote. Oh, by the way, he won in 2014 by 99% of the vote because 1% went to someone who ran on the integrity line. Judith Pascal in 2010 won by 100% of the vote. Same thing happened in 2009. Steve Levy, by the way, won in 2007 by 97% of the vote. What does this do to our democracy? You suppress the vote. You deny the franchise of the people of Suffolk County. And a vote means nothing. So I encourage you to move on removing fusion voting, which is a pay-to-play game played in the politics of New York.
Thank you very much. Judy Gardner. And after Judy will be Dahlia McManus. Miss Gardner, are you here? Okay, so Dahlia McManus.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. My name is Dahlia McManus. I am the Deputy Director of the Working Families Party in New York State. And I thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I do want to note that just about 15 minutes ago, Commissioner Jay Jacobs tweeted at Make the Road, criticizing them for opposing fusion voting. I find it deeply troubling, Commissioner Jacobs, that you are trolling community groups online as opposed to listening to the public, which is here to testify today. So I'd appreciate your full attention. I will keep my remarks focused on one topic now and one topic only: the relationship between fusion voting, public financing, and opportunity to ballot, or OTB. In both the New York City and Albany hearings, the topic was brought up by Commissioner Jacobs. Commissioner Jacobs, I have you? Yes, thank you. He stated or implied that fusion voting would imperil a public financing system, that OTBs would imperil the public financing system. His implication was clear. If the commission wants to establish a robust public financing system, then it will simultaneously have to either get rid of or undermine or maim fusion voting. Commissioner Jacobs either misunderstands or is mischaracterizing the situation. Perhaps He is counting on the other commissioners who are trusting in his deep knowledge of elections and Nassau County politics. So I will try to explain this very plainly. Opportunity to ballot, or OTB system, allows individuals who are not enrolled in a party to challenge the party's designated candidate via write-in ballots. Again, write-ins only. Commissioner Jacobs explicitly stated that a candidate seeking to be nominated via write-in would get public financing money, and in so drive up the cost of a public financing system, because candidates would now have a financial incentive to go out and try and steal minor party lines. So in essence, you get free money, you get more votes, more lines. That's his argument in a nutshell. But there is absolutely no reason to come to this conclusion. In New York City, for example, to be eligible for public financing, your name has to be on the ballot. And you have to have an opponent. You can't get public money for just being a single candidate. When a candidate seeks to capture a minor party line via write-in, by definition, their name is not on the ballot. And so despite Mr. Jacobs' assertions, you should be clear that OTBs have literally nothing to do with public financing. There is no reason to award any candidate public funds.
I don't want to cut you off, but I've been strict with everyone else regarding the 3 minutes. I'll let you finish this one sentence, or else I will have to interrupt you again.
Well, I just ask that you focus on the big job at hand and not be distracted by public financing, which has nothing to do with public financing of elections. The fusion has nothing to do with public financing. One other note is that the first New York City hearing, our people were told that they could testify in New York City and come back again, and now they are being told that you can't. And so it's unfair to change the rules after the first hearing. People were literally told you can testify more than once.
Thank you.
No one, Ms. McManus, no one was told by this commission that you could speak more than once.
Danny
I'm
Glabro,
sorry.
right there, working
I
family
was
party leader,
I
was
was
told, he went
chairing.
up and said,
Excuse
"I
me.
testify here."
Excuse me. I am now speaking, and I'm going to answer you. You wanted my attention. Well, you've
You're
got
mad
it.
at me now.
Yes.
Because I called you out for tweeting.
I'm going to answer that as well, Ms. McManus. It's now my time to speak. You've had your opportunity. Number one, I chaired that first meeting, and I made it very clear at that first meeting that people only get to speak once, and you won't be able to speak
Your staff,
twice.
Mr.
I am. That is directly from the commission, Ms. McManus. Secondly, I responded.
Are you calling him a liar? I was there when the
I'm
staff.
sorry, we're going to have a one-time person speak. So please wait for him to finish. Then you will be allowed to.
Thank you.
No, Ms. McManus, the next thing, I was directly tweeted at. My name was in a tweet from folks in the audience. At a break, when people were moving, I responded.
You're a public official.
And I am entitled to respond, and that is something I'm entitled to tweeting. There, you can tweet in response. Your claim was I'm not paying attention. I have sat here through these sessions, and I have listened courteously to everyone speak, including you. And I will continue to do that. And I will have my opinions, and I will state my opinions at the appropriate time. But your insinuation that I am not listening, or that I do not pay attention, I have to tell you, is offensive. And I'm not going to sit here for it. Every single member on this commission does so as a volunteer, takes time out of their day. We study these reports. We read every bit of testimony that comes in, and there has been quite a lot of it. So we're going to do our job, and I would appreciate it if you could do that, understand that. We're doing the very best that we can. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person we have will be Bruce Miller. All right, Mr. Miller. And after that, oh, okay, good. Sorry, yes, come up. Lunch break after? No, we can take a lunch break after.
Greetings, respected members of the panel. I am Bruce Miller, an elected trustee with the Village of Port Jefferson, where we do not campaign through major national or local party politics. I'd like to have a short conversation on history and cross endorsements or fusion voting. Our nation began by excluding a lot of people from voting. As time went on, we righted through law some of these wrongs. In the 1950s, a lawsuit from New York firmly established the concept in law of one person, one vote. Today, we are restricting the vote through registration and access in much of the South, Michigan, Wisconsin, etc. Gerrymandering is being used to effectively restrict the viability of a citizen's vote in even wider jurisdictions. Cross-party endorsements bear directly on the effectiveness of my vote. I am able to register, I am able to vote, but who I get to choose from is decided in back rooms. Cross-party endorsements often give me choices between unacceptable candidates with unacceptable ideas. Cross-party endorsement is the tail wagging the dog. It fosters corruption. The viability of my vote is greatly restricted under cross-party endorsement system. It needs to be changed. Cross-party endorsement needs to end. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have Michael Gendron. And after him will be Peggy Perkins.
Good afternoon. I want to thank the Commission for giving me the opportunity to speak before you about this very important issue. Over the past decade, we have witnessed the increased influence that money plays in our politics. We have elected representatives spending far too much time with the wealthy and out-of-district donors seeking large donations for their campaigns, and not enough time with constituents raising small donations and not enough time talking about kitchen table issues. I have seen requests for donations go out in December after they won their election in November. The system of relying on donations from the few, the wealthy and corporate donors, has put too much power in the hands of these few. We need to adopt a system that gives a plumber or carpenter the same influence as the real estate builder they work for. We need a system that gives an equal voice to a telephone lineman as the CEO of Verizon. We need a system that gives working men and women the means to run for office so they can represent the communities they live in and fight for the issues that affect everyday people. That system is publicly financed elections, modeled on having candidates focus on small donations from their constituents and having those small donations matched at least 6-1. We need this to be a permanent small donor public financing program that lowers contribution limits for both participating and non-participating candidates. New York has the highest contribution limits and is among the worst in the nation when it comes to small donors. We need a program adopted by this commission to include an independent enforcement unit. Since the Citizens United decision, a small donor matching program is the best solution to counter the big money flooding our elections. The small donor public financing program can restore people's faith in our state government and change the perception that nobody in Albany is listening. We can change the perception that the wealthy and corporations are all that matters. We have a chance to let the issues that are most important to average New Yorkers lead the way. Working families that have not had their voices heard or their daily issues addressed can now stand up and be counted. I hope that this commission will not allow itself to be distracted by attempting to abolish fusion voting. Fusion voting is a separate and unrelated issue. Fusion voting is a constitutionally protected voting right that an unelected commission does not have the legal standing to tamper with. Attempts in the past to roll back fusion voting have been blocked 3 times in state courts, including the highest court, the New York State of Appeals. So I urge this commission to focus their efforts on establishing a small donor public financing program that will actually level the playing field for average New Yorkers and will lead to a government that is truly represented by we the people, all of we the people. Thank you. Thank you. Peggy Perkins. Peggy Perkins.
Good afternoon, committee. My name is Peggy Perkins. I'm a parent, minority, and New York Communities for Change community activist. I am here today to address my concern about our election system. As an activist, I have been fighting for education, housing, and criminal justice. I have heard countless stories of tenants and children who have had lost hope because the system has shown them they have no voice. To me, fair elections is extremely important because there are many local low-income residents like myself who have a passion for fighting for their community, but due to the lack of financial support and our backgrounds that do not qualify us to run, it complicates the process. How is it that we teach our children that their voices matter when as adults, the system has been teaching us otherwise? And if we want our children to be the future, fair elections will both benefit them and encourage them to be part of history. And I just want to say one more thing. Busing students from school to do the bidding of political bosses is not okay. Fine, you could have young people speak out. Fine to have them witness their government at work. Busting them in to speak against the voices of minority voters is not okay. And also, as a parent, as a minority, I am a mother of 3 children. My oldest is 16. My fear for him, especially, that his voice, his opinion, that when he cannot vote, that his everything that does not matter. And this is why I am here today, because I have a 16-year-old. Before you know it, he's going to be legal to vote, and I want him to vote. And as a parent, as a community activist, I see changes that I can help make in the community. But because of my background, because I don't have the financial aspects to run, it's difficult for people like me. My children tell me all the time, Mommy, you need to be running for office. You need to be, for the school board. And I say, well, I can't. Why not? Because I don't have the money. So this is what I just wanted to say today. Thank you, everybody.
Who's next? Jay? Who's next? Yes, William Bailey.
Hello, everyone. I might be all over the place a little bit, but I'm currently upset right now, highly upset. So first I want to say we need to get big money out of politics so that people like me can have a vote, so I can have a chance, so that electeds are accountable to our communities and not big money so that I can have a chance as well. The other thing, I support fusion voting. It gives people like me and look like me an opportunity to really express what we need and not be ruled by a two-way system who works for the money and not for the people. As I sat there in my seat and as I waited to get up here and speak, I watched how I signed up before a lot of those people who had spoke already. Then I watched a group of brown people walk out, and I just began to get frustrated. And I said, this is what happens to us all the time. It's like we get overlooked, overheard, we get passed over so other people get a chance to speak, and then they all leave. And that's not fair to me. And as I heard a professor outside saying, because I wanted him to hear this, but because I got passed over, he's not here, so I want you to hear it. My coworker was trying to lecture to the students. He said, do you know who they are? He repeated. He said, they're my students. He came to their rescue as a mother or father would protect their children. What I saw was how parents raise their children and shape them and form them, and you do what I say. Now you do what I say. That's what the professor was saying to them. That's what I saw. What I saw was them as a piece of property like my ancestors who shed their blood, sweat, and tears while they built this country. People like me with nappy hair do not have a chance. People like me who speak culturally and not rightly or whitely do not get a chance. People who come from a background like mine with tall brown buildings and people hanging outside don't get a chance. People like me who know powerful people don't get a chance, who don't know powerful people. People like me who don't have a great education and have a great teacher like that professor was back there to stand up for those students don't get a chance.
Just as and I appreciate your testimony, but just as a matter for clarification, we are working off of the speaker's sign-up sheets that have arrival time and dates, and nobody is going out of order in that respect. Let me now call Benjamin Britton, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. A lot of what I'm going to say has already been said. I work with tenants in Hempstead and am a tenant in Long Beach myself. And I think that one of the things that we can see really clearly is the corrupting influence of money on our election system just through the real estate industry. They have a huge undue influence on our political process in New York State and basically work against the interests of the folks that I'm working with every day. I think that one of the things that we can do that would be extremely important in order to counterbalance this system that's so weighed towards the powerful and the rich would be to pass this fair elections reform. Public financing with 6-to-1 matching would be a huge step forward to allow folks that I work with and represent who have interest in pursuing politics to actually be able to be involved and be and to have an actual chance to participate in the political process. I also think it's extremely important that we lower the limit of the LLC loophole and really look at ways that we can limit Citizens United and just the unlimited funds that come from the really rich. Until we take these basic steps, I think that our democracy is going to be just at great threat to just being able to be bought by the highest bidder. So that's the first part. And then I also just want to speak in support of fusion voting. I think that it allows smaller political parties to exist. It allows us to run candidates that are more progressive on party lines. And it creates more choice and opportunity in our democracy. And so I just want to, I think we should uncouple the two things from each other, but I also want to say that I fully support fusion voting. Thank you.
Thank you. I have three more listed to speak. Rodman Serrano.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, members of the Public Campaign Financing Commission, for holding this meeting today. My name is Rodman Serrano, and I am the Training and Field Coordinator for the Long Island Civic Engagement Table, which is a coalition of 6 organizations working to increase civic participation in low-income communities of color on Long Island. Some of our table partners are right here in this room. They include Make the Road New York, New York Communities for Change, and Planned Parenthood of Nassau County. Since the creation of our organization in 2011, we have worked to make sure that immigrant communities and that communities of color have a strong voice in the political process. We do this by helping immigrants become citizens, assisting new citizens to register to vote, and making sure that their voices are heard at the polls on Election Day. In the fall, we knock on thousands of doors to get out the vote, and we knock on the doors that political candidates don't choose to go near. So it's not uncommon for us to hear, no one's really ever come to my door before, or I didn't even know about the elections. Sadly, we also hear from voters who have given up on the political process, voters who are rightfully frustrated because for too long, issues of key concern to them and their families are never addressed because in New York State, the money and influence of the wealthy and large corporations silences the voices of everyday Long Islanders. When people lack access to basic health care, or when parents have to work multiple jobs just in order to feed their children, something is seriously wrong in our state and we need a change. I'm here today testifying on behalf of our organization to speak strongly in favor of establishing a small donors public campaign finance system, which would give everyday people a stronger voice in government and also to decrease contribution limits so that we can begin to strengthen public participation in our political system and restore public trust in government that has long been broken. We urge you to put in place a small donors public financing program for both general and primary elections as soon as possible. And if our demands are not met, we all have every intention of using various means at our disposal to ensure that the interests and voices of our communities are respected and heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do now is we have Brady McCoy up next and Justin Bryant right following him. But what we're going to do now is take us a short 10-minute break before we ask Brady to come up and then the rest of the people on the list. And I'm going to turn this back to our temporary chair. But we're going to take just a 10-minute break. I assure you, please stay around. We do want to hear from everybody that has signed up and wants to speak. Thank you.
Yes.